Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1974 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Ellen Burstyn won for her performance in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. But why did she beat fellow nominees Diahann Carroll, Faye Dunaway, Valerie Perrine, and Gena Rowlands? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 47th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1974. We'll be discussing how Ellen Burstyn won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is another great friend. She's here for the second time on the Best Actress series, but you last heard her on this show for my special Best Picture episode where we talked about The Power of the Dog and that interesting year at the Oscars. But on the Best Actress series, we talked about the 1937 lineup, the one that Louise Reiner won for playing an Asian woman. Happy to say that we now have an actual Best Actress winner who is of Asian descent, so only took 95 years. But so excited to have her back on to talk this year. She's the co-host of the great podcast Oscar Wilde, also writer and podcaster at Awards Watch. Welcome back, Sophia Ciminello.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. It is always so much fun to come on your show. And last time I was on, we really had a 3-hour therapy session, really, after that award season that was so hard. And now we're going to have another therapy session, I think. We'll get to that movie very soon.
My goodness. Yes, we have a lot to break down, specifically with one movie that is coming later in this episode. Well, so excited to have you back on. But before we talk 1974, let's talk Best Actress as a category. And as a returning guest, you've already told me that your favorite Best Actress win of all time is Vivien Leigh. So my alternate question for you here is, what would you say is your favorite Best Actress lineup of all time?
This is such a fun spin on that question. I think the classic choice is absolutely 1950. My winner is usually Gloria Swanson, but if you ask me on another day, I could say someone else, which is fun. I think that's just a stacked historic lineup. If I think of a year from my lifetime, I also love 2010. So the Natalie Portman year with Michelle Williams, Annette Bening, Nicole Kidman. You have baby Indy, Jennifer Lawrence. But if I had to pick one, I would actually say this year that we're talking about today.
Oh my God.
I know. I'm so excited you had me on for this one. You know, the 70s are my favorite decade in film history. And I think that this is the best lineup, top to bottom, of the decade, men and women, really, lead or supporting. And it is so rare that I like every single performance in an acting category. That rarely happens. Oh my God, we usually have a dud here or two duds there, but this is a rare example where we have everyone who I love. And I'll save some of my other reasons for when we talk about the category as a whole, but for now, I will just say I love this year.
Well, I didn't even know that, and I'm so glad
Perfect planning.
Yeah, I know. I mean, truly so many greats in this lineup. I love that also you're here to talk Faye Dunaway.
Oh my God.
You know, obviously we'll talk more about her in Chinatown, but just in general, I know that you're doing your May Dunaway series on your show.
I am obsessed with Faye Dunaway. I can't wait to talk about her. I think I'm like one of the Faye Dunaway scholars, really, on the internet, which is a title to hold for sure. But yeah, I can't wait to break her down and get into some of the questions about her that we got on Twitter.
Yes, definitely, for sure. Well, my other question, you told me that, of course, Judy Garland was your most heartbreaking loss in this category. So instead, I will ask here, what would you say is your most heartbreaking snub in Best Actress? Someone who didn't even get the nomination.
Well, if you remember the last time I was on in this series, I gave you a list before getting to my number one. So I'm doing that again today.
A nominees list. Yeah,
so
truly.
Last year, I was really devastated that Viola Davis missed for The Woman King. I thought she was so incredible in that movie and just all of her work making that film happen. And she hit all of the precursors. And then Oscar nomination morning, my heart just sank when I didn't see her name. And I don't know, I think she's one of our great actresses. And even though she has an EGOT, she still, I feel like, doesn't get enough credit. Then I will also say my Paul Thomas Anderson ladies. So the most heartbreaking snub of my lifetime, I think recently, was Alana Haim for Licorice Pizza. I really only liked two of the nominees that year, Olivia Colman and Penelope Cruz. Already starting with some hot takes, it's fine. And she had just this true A Star is Born performance. I loved her in it, and it was such a throwback to the 70s, so I was really hoping she could make it in. I also wanted to shout out Vicky Krieps for Phantom Thread, because this one's a little bit different, though, because I never expected her to get in. In fact, I didn't expect many of the nominations that came Phantom Thread's way to happen. But once I saw the surprise haul, I was really sad for her that it didn't happen. She has my favorite performance in the movie, and I'm a Daniel Day-Lewis stan, so that's big. But my overall signature snub that I always come back to is Shelley Duvall for Robert Altman's Three Women. She is an actress who I think is just completely singular and so misunderstood. And what she does in Three Women is nothing short of astonishing. There's a critical moment in that film, and I don't want to spoil it for your listeners. I'm sure, you know, your listeners, fans of great actress performances, many have seen it, but just in case, it is a little bit more of an obscure one, I think, sometimes. But there's a moment in that film where there's this flip, and Shelley Duvall's character has to react to what Sissy Spacek's character is doing. She's also brilliant in the film, by the way. But it's just so fully realized and strange and unique, and she ended up winning Best Actress at Cannes. LAFCA, she was runner-up at New York Film Critics Circle, got nominated for a BAFTA, but then, of course, AMPAS wasn't cool enough.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really, really cool answer. And it's something like I talked with Andrew Carden about, like a Mia Farrow situation where it's just like very disappointing to have someone who turned in multiple great performances and had a really great sort of run in a specific era, but they just, for whatever reason, couldn't land a nomination ever. You know, and I would also throw in The Shining as well as something from that era that I think is worthy, even if some organizations would disagree with.
Yeah.
But that's really excellent, and all of your nominees I pretty much agree with as well. So yeah, very good. Well, I think it's time to break down this year.
It's time.
It's time. So let's talk about it. The 47th Academy Awards Best Actress nominees were Ellen Burstyn in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Diahann Carroll in Claudine, Faye Dunaway in Chinatown, Valerie Perrine in Lenny, and Gena Rowlands in A Woman Under the Influence, with the winner being Ellen Burstyn. So, before we break down the performances here, I mean, you said right at the front, this is your favorite of all time. Let's talk about why that is. What is it about this lineup that's so special?
Well, I think when you think about the 70s as a decade in film history, you think about people taking risks and the characters that you see on screen being different from what we've seen before. And through your Best Actress series, you've talked about some performances that are outliers that feel like rare nominations, many in fact, but you also have people who play your working mothers, and we have those here, but they feel different. They feel more realized, and the films feel like they belong to the women often in those roles. And I think just with all of these actresses, they all bring something completely different to their movies. So you have someone like Ellen Burstyn, who had been working for a while, but who didn't get her due for extraordinary work in the biggest horror movie American moviegoers had ever experienced up to that point. You have Faye Dunaway, who was in a really odd point in her career post Bonnie and Clyde. She hadn't really taken off again, but she had this sort of dangerous, alluring beauty that made her a perfect fit for Evelyn Mulwray. And you have Diahann Carroll, who gives a type of performance that is never recognized by the Academy, which makes it even cooler that it was recognized in 1974. But she's the fourth Black woman to be nominated in the category, and this movie itself just feels so alive and energetic and different from what we've seen before. Valerie Perrine, absolutely devastating in Lenny, and it's this perfect newcomer performance. And then you have Gena Rowlands, who gives what many people cite is the greatest performance in the category ever. So you don't just have one of these women or two of them in a category with, oh, it's her time to be nominated, or we really loved this movie, so we're going to throw her a bone. It's every single person here belongs, and I love that. And there's also room when you look outside of this category, and we'll talk about some of these people, I think, where you think, oh, this person absolutely could have gotten two, but who would I replace? I have no idea. And that's, I think, always fun with this category. And the movies are also all great. They're so fun to watch. I think the lowest rating I gave one of these movies was 4 stars. And you probably know from your series, and even recently, I mean, you watch movies that are 1.5 stars, not all the way up there. So I think these actresses also all steal the show away from the men in their movies, and I'm always here for that.
Amen. Yeah. Very, very well stated, and I very much agree. I will just be upfront and say this is definitely a contender for me as one of the best lineups of all time. It really is a year where finally several episodes where at least one of the nominees is just a total clunker, to be quite honest. There's not a weak link in the bunch. And I think any one of these, I truly believe, would have my vote in a weaker year, And I think this is also just a quintessentially 70s lineup for me, where either you have these films or performances or just themes that are gritty and naturalistic. And I mean, with a slight exception of Faye Dunaway, who I think is more stylized, but intentionally stylized, I think you're seeing the promise of actresses like Anna Magnani or Sophia Loren or Joanne Woodward, who were really ahead of their time when they were getting those nominations, really sort of being realized here. And there's just a humanity in most, if not all, of these performances that I really just respond to. And yeah, I think, like you said, you also have a contender here where I think it ranks among the best nominees that this category's ever seen. So I'm very excited to dive into everything here. A little anxious, honestly, because there's so much to get into.
Oh my God. When you asked me to be on for this episode in particular, obviously I was so excited because it's my favorite year. It's so important, I think, to Academy history and to these women. But I'm also a little intimidated. I mean, these are huge names. These performances are crazy, but I think we can dig into it and it will be a lot of fun. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're starting with Diahann Carroll in Claudine. So the late, great Diahann Carroll, she was only nominated this one time. And in the grand scheme of things, she didn't do a whole lot of film compared to TV. But she had a great career. She got her start in a film with a small role in Carmen Jones, which we talked about with Dorothy Dandridge, which is poetic in a way, with Dorothy Dandridge as the first Black actress to be nominated in this category. Diahann Carroll, as you said, is the fourth. But before Claudine, she had a kind of thriving career, really, including winning a Tony Award for the musical No Strings, becoming the first Black actress to win in that lead actress in a musical category. She also made history on television with a starring role on Julia, where she became the first Black woman to lead a sitcom in America in a non-stereotypical role. And she was the first Black woman nominated for an Emmy for Best Lead Actress in a Comedy Series. So she really broke a lot of ground. And even though technically she might not be making any firsts with this Oscar nomination, her performance in Claudine and the film itself is also transcending stereotypes. So I think it's a significant nomination. But before we get into the film, we should note that Diana Sands was originally cast in this role, but she got sick and she asked her friend Diahann Carroll to step in for her. And she really put her heart into it, especially because she wanted to sort of pay tribute to her friend and just give it all she had. And I think she does. But Claudine, it's about a single mother, Claudine, played by Diahann Carroll, living in New York. She has 6 kids and she's raising them on her own. And she gets into a relationship with a garbage collector, Rupert, played by James Earl Jones, which is complicated by the fact that she's also on welfare and she would get a reduction in her income if it were found out that she's seeing someone who's providing for her and her family. So she sort of keeps it hush-hush from the social worker until she finds out about it, at which point Claudine has to sort of decide how to proceed from there. So let's talk Diahann Carroll. What are your thoughts on her performance here in Claudine?
Yeah, so I had first seen Diahann Carroll in Carmen Jones, like you mentioned, and I had mainly, honestly, thought of her earlier because of Dynasty and her work there. So I think that's maybe how a lot of people will know Diahann Carroll, but I loved her in this movie. I think it is a very complex, layered performance that radiates with strength and warmth. I was just really, I think, taken aback by how this was not a stereotypical role in any way, and she really leaned into that. And it's a type of movie that is unapologetically about a Black woman, and she is a 3-dimensional character. And I think the important thing too about this movie and about the time is that this was an alternative to the blaxploitation films that had become so popular in the 70s, where women were often in supporting, sometimes stereotypical roles, where it would just be a family drama and they would sort of be cast to the side and not have anything really like making it as complex as it could be. And of course, like, those films have merits, but this just feels different. And Diahann Carroll knew that too. I watched an interview with her on TCM and she talked about how this was the most extensive role that she had on film. And in her career prior to this, she described herself and the roles that she was offered as the nice nurse, teacher, or wife. And this gave her the opportunity to have more fire and to really dig deep into her emotional scale. And I loved hearing her talk about that because I think that is what she really does in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that this is the only film in this lineup that I hadn't seen before this. I mean, I heard it was good, but I just personally hadn't seen a lot of chatter around this film and this performance, so I wasn't sure what to expect. And it really surprised me in a positive way. And for as sort of dark and dramatic as the film can get at times, I think there's this really charming quality to it that just feels like, you know, we're watching regular people in their regular lives and coming from a place of not wanting to sort of wallow in the struggles of Claudine's experiences, you know, and still honoring that she has a hard life where, you know, she's busting her ass to provide for a good life for her kids, but not making it into like a downer, you know, because that's how life is. Sometimes it sucks and you have to deal with it, but then there are sort of bright spots too. And even like bright spots within the low moments. So I think the film and the performances really do a good job of really giving a well-balanced look at life for a Black single mother living in Harlem at this time. And I think the reason that I responded to it so positively is in large part because of Diane's performance, and James Earl Jones too. But for her, I think she's just so radiant and expressive with her face, and there's also just a spontaneity, I think, in how she responds to her environment that just feels very alive, and like she really studied this character inside and out, you know, almost like a theater performer, where she's done all the hard work, she's gone over it over and over, and now she just is this character. And I actually think that's something we'll talk about with other performances in this lineup too. But it's just one of these things where it's like you don't really see the work, you know, that it doesn't feel like an effortful performance. She just kind of is this person.
Yeah, that is what I really responded to also when I mentioned that it feels like a three-dimensional, like fully realized character. You feel like Diahann Carroll is Claudine. And I know that's sort of silly to say sometimes when you're talking about actors really getting into their roles and transforming, but here it feels effortless. This film is interesting because you can almost see it as a play. It would work, I think, in a stage adaptation or as a TV dramedy sitcom style show.
Totally.
So the ways that she can navigate between theater, film, television, I think you can really see that here, and it's something that really stood out to me in the film. And I think that I also really responded to the humor of the movie. Like you said, it can get really dark at times. I think when you really do realize the gravity of her situation and how she has to provide for her children, and in those moments with her children where she's having very real conversations with them as a mother, or like really letting them have it, it still has this lightness and the humor to it. Like I love how the movie opens and this group of women are on the bus making sex jokes, talking about how that's not what they meant when they said equal opportunity. Like it's just a good way to
saying she needs vitamin F.
Vitamin F, yes, incredible. I was like, that's such a good way to open the movie. I think just to show her warmth and her ability to have this rapport with other people. Diahann Carroll also, she's so pretty. Like she has this like radiant quality to her, but she also has that toughness and the ability, that she can figure out what is going on like in her circumstance and how to solve the problems in her life. So even though she is so beautiful and just so it's fun to watch her, she has that grit that is crucial, I think, to these 70s movies where you have these very realistic, authentic performances and films.
Yeah, I think it is very well balanced. And yeah, in that beginning section, I think her kind of not having a man and all of that, I think it's one of those things where she does still have that desire, but she almost doesn't want to put herself out there again because, as we'll learn a little bit later on, she's had other experiences with men, including multiple husbands, and it always ends in heartbreak, and so she's not actively looking for it anymore. And that's what makes the sort of serendipity of her getting to know Rupert, or as she says, Roop, shortly after that, very natural. Yeah. Because it's just like when you're not actively looking for someone and then someone comes into your life in that sort of unexpected way. I feel like that's a very common thing that a lot of us experience. And she's just sort of letting things progress kind of naturally, but also I think still making herself heard of what she wants out of this relationship, because she's been through this before and she knows how it might end. So she's like, I'm going to just set the ground rules. We're going to have a good time for a while. And then that's kind of it.
Yeah. I think it feels like a mature adult relationship. Like it's the type of relationship that can only happen when you've sort of experienced all of the bad, or you've been with enough people who have treated you poorly or who have taught you these lessons that are often really hard. And I think what exists between Claudine and Roop, as she calls him, is this sense of respect for each other and a sense of trust. I think even when, as audience members, like we can doubt that or fear for her because she's in a really tough, sticky situation that would be difficult to navigate, I think you do still find trust in that relationship, and that's due to their performances, I think, and their chemistry with each other. I think that there is a humor that exists when they're together, when they're laughing together. I loved watching those scenes, but also I feel like and this is big it starts really in the 60s, but you really get it in the 70s of these female characters understanding their sexual power and what that means for them. And I think what's interesting about Claudine is that she knows she has that power, but you watch her sort of withhold sometimes or wonder what to do with that. And I feel like that is a really fascinating thing about this character and about how Carroll sees her and the different types of power that she has with the other characters on screen.
Yeah. And I think a good example of that is when she goes over to his place for the first time
Mm-hmm.
and she's taking a bath there. And
Yeah.
he kind of like playfully tries to get her to unbutton her shirt.
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of like, swats his hand away, but she still can't help but, smile
Mm-hmm.
because she already does seem to like him, but she doesn't want to jump right into that. And she maybe doesn't also want him to think of her as, that kind of person, quote unquote,
Right.
even if she might want to do something with him.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just feel like you get so much just from her expressions and her sort of mix of emotions that she doesn't have to outright explain how she's feeling,
Right. She never does really have to explain. I think you can always feel that sort of
Yeah.
tension that's there in any kind of frame. And with that scene in particular, it's funny because as a viewer, you just know what's going to happen. But it's funny, I think, to see her like do that little dance with him. That is so familiar, right?
Yeah, very charming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I also really like how we see, in her parenting style, which is very, tough and firm, but also fair.
Mm-hmm.
And she just fully rules the roost. And she, doesn't even feel any desire to pretend in front of Roop when he visits, and she's
Yeah.
just automatically just right off the bat showing him the real her. Here's my situation.
Mm-hmm.
She's not sort of dancing around anything. And she just really knows how to work her face and her
Yeah.
gestures to sort of fill in the character, not unlike who we're about to talk about, Faye Dunaway, in that sense, really
Yeah.
a master of that as well. But I love just in these little micro moments that if you're not paying attention, you might not pick up on, like her kind of wry smile when Roop is like telling her kids that their mama's going out on a date.
Uh-huh.
And she just, has these like little secret moments that we in the audience can see, but maybe not everyone else in the film, the other characters might see. But she just is so, I don't know, we just feel we're so on her side, I guess.
Yeah.
And we are really rooting for her.
We really are, and that's so important, I think, to this film, that you're always with her and you're on her side throughout. And I remember watching it being really surprised at just how quickly she introduces Roop to that side of her life. Like it's like no frills, like again, like that type of mature adult relationship. It's like, this is who I am. You can be a part of this, or you don't have to be, but we'll just laying it all out there. Like, these are what my relationships are like with my kids who are in, some of them are teenagers to being really little. And that's hard. But she, I think, she shows him everything that she can do. And those little gestures are really important, because I do think the script itself has some weaknesses, but I think that what she's able to do, in addition to like the lines that are in the script, just being able to communicate with her eyes or just a simple gesture, really makes this character work.
Yes. And I do think her as a performer, she is nuanced enough that she doesn't fall into a stereotype or even judge her in any way for her decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really think the film does either. She's just doing what she can to sort of have her head above water, really, and survive and give these kids a decent childhood. So then, of course, when it inevitably comes out that he's with her and the social worker knows about it, it leads to this great scene, I think, for her that turns into an argument in the bed where, he kind of has his pride about not wanting to be tied down, not wanting to be on welfare. And she's just very frustrated with him because she, wants to be with him on a more serious level, and he's just insisting that he doesn't want to be on it and be tied down and, having to account for everything he pays for and all that. And she's just so annoyed with him and his refusing to let it go. And she says he has bad balls, and she says, I've got better balls than you any day.
Mm-hmm.
She really lands those kind of punchline emotional breaking point moments, especially when we get towards the end of the film when she's dealing with her kids too, reaching those breaking points. I think because we are so charmed by her warmth and her radiance in the beginning, I think when she does reach those more climactic moments, they're sort of earned because you're on her side through it all.
I completely agree, and I think that scene that you're referencing to, that really is, if I had to choose an Oscar scene for her, that is the one that I would choose, because I do think it really shows her range and shows everything that she can do. But the film, I think, smartly navigates up to that point, like you said, of, she's gotten us on her side. We are so charmed by her, and we see all of the strengths and weaknesses of the character and of the relationships that she has. So of course, like, she has to respond to him in this way. It feels very authentic to the character, and when she's delivering those punchlines, like you mentioned, that is something that, she had to do at this point, and in order to, make the decisions that she needed to make and to navigate the murky system that she's trying to figure out. And the entire movie, I think she really is trying to figure out what each relationship in her life means to her. And she's always the leader and the provider, and she's just always trying to figure that out and how she can do everything for everyone else. And when he puts this barrier up for her, honestly, she's like, no, I'm not dealing with this. This is not how this goes. Not now.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another good moment shortly after that when the kids have prepared this nice party for him because it's Father's Day, and he's basically like, a father figure to them at this point, and he doesn't show up. There's this great moment where she's clearly upset about him not showing up to the party, and she's just kind of trying to dance anyway, even though she's disappointed. Very relatable. Anyway.
So relatable, honestly. And it's similar. It reminded me.
Dancing through the pain, right? It's all you can do. Yeah.
Ellen Burstyn does something similar, and Alice doesn't live here anymore that we can talk about, I think. But there are some parallels, I think, to both of their performances.
And we get some
roles.
Dancing from Gena Rowlands, too.
Oh, yes, we do.
In a different kind of
very,
way.
very different dancing. But dancing through the pain, for sure.
I guess, yeah, that's true.
Ooh.
I think all the stuff with her kids just feels very authentic to me as well, where she's really having to lay down the law in many respects. The stuff with her daughter getting pregnant is really heightened stuff, and I think that's something that could verge into melodrama, soap opera kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe part of the writing does feel that way, but I do think that she grounds it pretty nicely. Yeah.
Exactly. I think it can get there, and it starts to go there, but she doesn't let it. She always keeps it very real to the tone of what has been happening in the film already. So I don't know. I feel like, again, this performance, it's something that we rarely see in Best Actress. And I'm so glad that she was nominated, because on the surface, I could see like viewers looking at this and thinking, how is this Oscar worthy? How is this any different than anything else? But it's so different, and it's all in the subtleties. It's all in the choices that she makes to bring Claudine to life and to make her this very real person. You believe her at every moment of the film.
Yeah. And speaking to, the Oscar-worthy nature of it, I do think nowadays this would probably be like an Indie Spirit nominee, and then maybe wouldn't translate, perhaps. I don't know how the campaign would be, because that's always a part of it now, but yeah, this just feels like one of those performances that could be like that small little indie gem that just doesn't break through, unfortunately.
For sure. This...
Like Nicole Bahari and Miss Juneteenth, something like that.
Perfect example. Yeah, this is Gotham Award winner, Indie Spirit nominee. Exactly.
Yes, totally. Going back to the stuff with her daughter being pregnant and everything, I did want to pinpoint something, which is that she mentions, I was watching an AFI interview that she had, that she wishes that the transition between her physically, beating her daughter, which she does at a certain point, and she wishes that her kind of like taking it out on her daughter, and then her clearly taking out her own frustrations about her own life, she wishes that were a little clearer in the film. And that was something that was important to her and to her interpretation of the character, that it wasn't that Claudine is an abusive mother necessarily. She's just kind of dealing with her own pain, and it's kind of coming out in this unfortunate way. And she felt that the director John Barry didn't quite make that transition clear enough, which I sort of agree with. I actually agree with her there too. I will say, like, I did
feel that from her, like her intention. And
Yeah.
you
right.
can, I think when you've spent so much time with an actress like Diahann Carroll in this movie, you can pick up on those nuances and see, like, this woman's going through a lot, and having 6 kids and like taking care of them, that is so much. I mean, I can barely take care of myself. Like, I can't even imagine 6 children, right? It's like, my God. But I think you can see that, and you can see what she's doing. But yeah, I do wish, I think that the director had a little bit more nuance there, for sure.
Yeah, but, towards the end, I feel like she gets just like this string of very emotional, big scenes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, she really makes them authentic and also different enough in her response, for example, to her daughter versus her son, who tells her that, like, he got a vasectomy,
right.
Mm-hmm. And he is kind of insulting her for Rupert going off. And he says that she's better off and all that, and she refuses to even entertain the idea that she's better off. I think she just really lands the conclusion here without it feeling like, oh, this is my big Oscar scene. Like, this is my big moment.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the difference between those scenes, it does make sense, I think, for the character and how she reacts differently to her daughter and to her son, like sharing that information with her, and the relationships with them that we've seen throughout the film. It does make sense in how she would respond that way. And again, like, this is an actress who I think she really understood this character inside and out and knew why certain things that her children did or said to her would affect her differently. And I do like how the ending, it really builds to giving her all of these great scenes, really, with a number of the actors in the film. But it is her film through and through.
Yeah, truly. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to mention about Miss Diahann Carroll before we move on?
I don't think so. I feel like, just echoing everything that we said, she's wonderful in this film, and more people should watch it. It is in the Criterion Collection, and
yes, it is.
I also can't believe this was my first time watching it, but definitely worth checking it out, especially for her performance.
Absolutely. And to reiterate what we're saying, I give credit, even if I don't always give credit to the Academy when it comes to their race issues. I give credit to them for seeing her with this performance. I think it definitely helped that she had established herself pretty well, like I said, winning a Tony and being on television and all that. But she really went above and beyond, I think, with this performance and made herself known. So, all right, let's move on to our next nominee, a little actress named Faye Dunaway.
Oh my God.
In Chinatown. Yes, you're bracing yourself right now.
Yes.
So Faye Dunaway, following her incredible breakout year in 1967 with Bonnie and Clyde, she's very in demand. She did The Thomas Crown Affair, The Arrangement, Little Big Man, Puzzle of a Downfall Child, Doc, The Three Musketeers, some successes, some very much not. She also did theater, including A Streetcar Named Desire. So she was very much just diving headfirst into these big, challenging roles. And then here's Chinatown, which was offered to her by Roman Polanski, the director, even though the producers wanted Jane Fonda. Again, we talked about on the 1971 episode where Jane Fonda thought that Faye might be better for the role of Clute. So it's like the two of them are very often, I think, in sort of a friendly competition in terms of like the same kinds of roles that they were offered. Like, just very serious, but also alluring at the same time. Like, it's a very similar type. But this is also another situation where there was a bit of a fraught production between her and Polanski, where he apparently ripped a hair out of her head at one point because it was in the way, and she was furious. Not only that, but for other unacceptable behavior. But she ultimately would defend the film and her experience. But it wasn't a fun time for her filming this. Or for other people, perhaps. But let's get into it. A lot to get into here. I don't think I even wrote a description for this. Sorry about that. Okay. But I could just go from memory. So the film is about J.J. Gittes, played by the great Jack Nicholson, who we will be talking about, I think, quite a bit as a co-star on this Best Actress series. Detective, LA, noir, 30s, and he comes across this case of Evelyn Mulwray, who was at first played by Diane Ladd, who will also come up in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Great year for her. And she is not the real Evelyn Mulwray. It turns out to be a kind of conspiracy, and then the real Evelyn Mulwray shows up, and she is... Sorry, I'm getting lost in thought right now because there's so much going on with Chinatown.
Chinatown is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's flawless. I think so. Once Evelyn Mulwray arrives, there is sort of this interesting dance because yes, like J.J. Gittes or Mr. Gitz, as the wonderful John Huston refers to him, there becomes this great mystery about water in Los Angeles and about what's going on with Evelyn Mulwray. She sort of wants him to drop this case about an affair because originally Evelyn Mulwray, the Diane Ladd character, just comes to Jake and says, my husband's having an affair. He doesn't take her seriously, but then it all becomes intertwined and it becomes this tale of power and greed. And we find out that Evelyn Mulwray, the Faye Dunaway, real Evelyn Mulwray, her husband was running the water department, but it was partners with her father, Noah Cross. And it becomes this very tangled web. But I love Chinatown so much. And she and Jake Gittes, of course, like get involved, and he starts to like follow her, and a lot happens. I think we can spoil Chinatown. That's fine.
I think
it's been around for a long
50
time.
Years almost. Yeah.
My sister, my daughter. We can get into all of that.
Well, yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah. But like I said, I feel like you've been watching a lot of her recently with your May Dunaway series. So would love if you could just explain even more about your overall thoughts are on Faye and why you respond to her as well as you do.
Oh
and what you think of her in one of her biggest performances here in Chinatown.
Yeah, so I absolutely love Faye Dunaway. I think she is such a risk taker, such an explosive actress. There's something that pulls you into all of her roles, and she's such a perfect actress for the time. So when you look at the 60s into the 70s, thinking of Bonnie and Clyde, thinking of Chinatown, going into Network, which you'll talk about in a few years where she won, I think everything just feels so dangerous. And it's such a seminal time in film history, specifically in American film history. And Faye was at the center of all of it. I mean, can you think of 3 films really that speak to how cinema was changing than Bonnie and Clyde, Chinatown, and Network? I mean, there's certainly, you can bring in The Godfather, you can bring in a number of great 70s movies, but she really was in 3 films that endured. And she's the type of actress that I just have always connected with. And I love her campy features later on, but Chinatown, I think, is really a performance that catches you by surprise. And it, the first time I watched Chinatown years ago was in college. I was given special instructions by my dad that I shouldn't watch it on my computer. I shouldn't watch it at home. I needed to wait until it was playing in a theater, and then I could see Chinatown. And I'm so glad I did, because it's become one of my favorite movies of all time. I think it's absolutely flawless. The only imperfections are deliberate inclusions from Polanski, like the spot in Evelyn's iris or different things like that. I just love it. But on first viewing, I was really struck by Jack Nicholson. I loved his performance. And I think at the time, that's how it was too. But the more and more I've watched it, I've just become so fascinated by what Faye does as Evelyn Mulwray. And films with a twist, like this one, with the incest twist that we get, most of these types of films do not work on second watch. You know what's coming. That kind of ruins a little bit of the movie because you don't have that surprise anymore. But this is a rare case where it doesn't really matter because Faye is so strong in the movie. She has to have a certain wall up the entire time, and the performance has to be so pitch perfect that every time you find different nuances in it that make the twist at the end even more rewarding, and the movie even more devastating with the ending. And there are so many connections, I think, to Polanski's difficult time in his life with this movie that we can talk about, and, you know, why he really wanted to change the ending from what Robert Towne included in his script. Robert Towne wanted it to be happy, and I'm so glad Polanski changed it, because I think that the ending, as crushing as it is, really shows you that evil and power typically win. And that's what makes it stand out, I think, is the core New Hollywood film for me. And Faye is a huge, huge part of that. I also just love actresses who are dramatic and a bit misunderstood. So she definitely fits into that. But yeah, a long-winded way to say I love Faye Dunaway, and I love her in Chinatown.
Yeah. I mean, Faye Dunaway is a force. I love how she just thoroughly dives into her roles, full energy, full commitment, and Chinatown is really no different, you know, and I think she especially works well as these more heightened characters and sort of playing with archetypes and playing with expectations too, and, you know, creating her own version of Bonnie Parker, and then, you know, playing this ultimate career woman in Network, and then, you know, playing like the true mother from hell in Mommy Dearest, right? And there's like, here it's kind of similar, even though she's not as loud or commanding maybe as some of those other roles. I think her sort of introduction in The Office is very evocative, very obviously film noir, femme fatale, mystery woman, like what's her secret? And she looks the part. She looks like she really comes from this era. She also sounds like it too, when she's kind of putting on that accent that's not exactly like transatlantic, but definitely of that 30s era. And there's almost like a snobbery there too, where she's sort of asserting her dominance by being like, look, you've never met me, I never hired you, sort of obviously indicating that the person he thought was Evelyn Mulwray is not Evelyn Mulwray, it's actually me. And she's just really leaning into the sort of artifice, I think, that comes with playing a femme fatale in a film noir, but it doesn't come across as like mimicry, I don't think. No. You know, it doesn't feel like a bit that she's doing.
Yeah.
So,
and one of the reasons why I love Faye in this role is because she has the type of face that would have worked so well in the 30s or the 40s. Like Greta Garbo. Like, she just has that type of look, the cheekbones and her everything with her face. Just, she's so period perfect for this movie. So it's sort of rare that she got an opportunity to, in the 70s, make a film that is so of the time and so progressive in its filmmaking choices, in the style, in the writing, but she could play that version of the character from the past, which I think is really cool. And I absolutely love the power dynamic when she first enters that office, because it's so funny, you know, when you, no disrespect to Diane Ladd as Evelyn Mulwray, but when you see her husband, you think, why would he cheat on her? But then when you see Faye Dunaway, you're like, he would cheat on her? Like, that's so crazy. It's so silly, right? To think about that. Like, what? Yeah. What's something deeper is going on here. And there's also an importance, I think, when she walks in on him and he's in the middle of telling a racist joke. Like, he is fully, like, bottom of the barrel at this moment. Like, this is the worst of him. And she's coming in almost like she has this sort of glow around her. She's like, I'm the one in power in this moment. Even though throughout the film, there are times when you feel like she has absolutely no power at all. Just full weakness and vulnerability. So I like that she's established in this way, and that's how the film starts with her. But then we learn more as the film goes on.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. And it feels, for me, just in doing this show, very different from Bonnie Parker, I think, in how
Completely.
she's presenting herself. Also as like a full-grown woman
Mm-hmm.
who has had to make some really tough, she's been through a lot of tough life experiences, but she doesn't want to reveal too much at once. And,
Yeah.
I think that's really kind of the key to this performance, and the key to why the film is as successful as it is how she is so withholding in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning and not opening up at all. And it makes you kind of want to lean in. And I feel like scene by scene, it's like she's sort of peeling back the layers until you reach the end. And then obviously we have that brutal sequence where you've gained such sympathy for her,
Mm-hmm.
now that you know her full story. It's one of those things where, they didn't film in order necessarily, but it feels based on her performance like that. And because of obviously the sharpness of the screenplay and the direction and everything, like it's all a natural progression somehow.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that has to be something that's so difficult to achieve as an actress, especially because just getting into the behind the scenes stories a little bit about Chinatown, I highly recommend the Sam Wasson book. I'm sure
Yes.
many of your listeners have read
Mhm.
it, The Big Goodbye. I
Yes,
always
as have I.
mistakenly call it The Long Goodbye as my, one of my favorite Altman films, but it's The Big Goodbye. And it gets into a lot of the difficulties, yes, with Faye on set and how, the crew treated her and how she treated them. They called her the Dread Dunaway and how everyone hated working with her. But a big thing I always think about is that Polanski gave her no direction. She had to come up with this character practically on her own. She would ask him, what is my character's motivation? And he would pretty much tell her, like, that's your job. Like, you figure it out. And this was a character that I can imagine you would want to know what her motivations are in any scene. Actually, Polanski, that's your job. Like, you are the one who is supposed to be directing her to this performance. Obviously, I think that what Polanski does with this movie is nothing short of incredible. Like I said, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. But when you really think about how he treated her on set, and yes, I'm sure there's some truth to the stories about how Faye was really late to things and, wouldn't talk to assistant directors. She said, I'll only talk to the director. I'm sure those things, some of them are true, some of them are embellished, but I think I would react pretty negatively too if I was trying to form a character that is all in the details and all in the subtleties, and my director wasn't giving me anything in return, which I think makes her performance that much more incredible. And in the book, Polanski said that Evelyn's nervous pauses, like this is from interviews and things like that, her nervous pauses or when she would stop things, he believed those to be ways for her to cover for herself for not having learned her lines. But I really think that this is a fundamental misunderstanding of your own character. This seems exactly right for Evelyn Mulwray, right? She would pause. She would have hesitations. She doesn't trust anyone. She doesn't know who she can trust. And there's this really key scene, I think, when she is with Jake and she says, it has to do with my father. And he says, I know. And she pauses and says, you do? And it's just in that little moment that you think, what does she think he found out from this conversation? What does he know? And it's this very delicate balance that she's walking on a tightrope the entire movie. And it's really a shame, I think, that she didn't get that sort of direction from Polanski on what to do, and she had to create it herself. Honestly, I think of this all the time when I watch it now, and when I think about when I watched Polanski interviews for this episode for research, the way that he talked about her, it was just so negative, and he made her out to be this crazy person, that she made everyone's lives miserable, that you couldn't believe anything she said. And it really reminded me a lot of how Noah Cross talked about his daughter, talked about Evelyn, and how he really, I think, didn't have, he was this like evil man who was gaslighting and told everyone what they should believe about her, and in turn people believed it. because he was the one who was in power. So yeah, I draw that parallel, and it's kind of scary, but I feel bad for Faye. I do.
Yeah. It's a complicated situation because obviously we know that she has her issues with working with people just in general.
She does. Certainly.
But yeah, I do think that some of that comes from her just not feeling heard.
Yeah.
You know, and her taking her work very seriously.
Yeah. And, you know, how many passes do we give male actors for being perfectionists? Or for, I used this example on our recent Faye Dunaway episode, but, you know, when Daniel Day-Lewis was in My Left Foot, he made people carry him over wires in his wheelchair.
Yeah.
Like between scenes. Like that, you know, it's okay in that situation, but I don't know. It's tricky.
Part of his process.
But
with her, it's like, oh, she's just being difficult. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And she is difficult. I'm not saying she's not. Some of the things that she does are crazy and out there, but yeah. And a huge thing too with this movie that I feel like, so with everything that happened with Polanski, you know, he had this absolutely horrific childhood and upbringing where, you know, he lost his mother in the Holocaust, and then everything that happened with Sharon Tate, he sort of believed that any like woman who was attached to him at any point and who brought him happiness would end up dying. And another interesting thing I read about the Evelyn Mulwray character was that he wanted Faye Dunaway's makeup to look like his mother, and that like Cupid's bow on her lipstick and things like that. And that I think adds another dark layer to his treatment of her and the ways that, you know, maybe he thought of what was coming to her, and that it was nothing but pain and death and suffering. There's a lot going on in Polanski's life at the time that, you know, you can view as separate from the film, certainly, but I think in this case, it's sort of impossible to separate because it was how he directed Faye.
Yeah, you're right. And thank you for giving all of that context, because I do think it is very important to recognize the work that she is putting into this when it might not seem like she is, and that it's just kind of like a archetypal character. There is a lot of intention behind what she's doing, especially, for example, going back to her relationship with her father and what you were saying about her kind of longer pauses. You know, like there's that one line where she's like, Hollis and my father had a falling out, and she just, you know, she's like trembling and she's lighting another cigarette even though she already has one. And it's really suggesting this relationship that is very fraught with who knows what at that point in the film. But you know that there's some serious stuff in her background there. When, you know, and when you're watching it for the first time, I don't know if you really can predict what's coming necessarily, like what the nature of her relationship with her father is. But that scene is really where you see some of the reason behind her cautiousness that she's been expressing throughout the film so far. I think all of those scenes where she is kind of having to talk about her father, like when other people are bringing him up, and she's kind of like unmoored and doesn't exactly, like, it's literally triggering for her to even talk about him. Yeah. And I think she really expresses that accurately, I would say.
And part of the genius too, when you put it together, his performance and the way that Faye Dunaway's Evelyn responds, not to him being in the same room as her or anything like that, but just his name being brought up in conversations. And you start to think about, okay, so this woman has gone from being completely under the care and trauma of her father to her husband, who is also her father's partner. So she's just kind of trapped in this web of power in Los Angeles at the time and doesn't really have agency of her own. So when you see her interacting with Jack Nicholson's character, you start to think, can she manipulate him? Can she figure out a way to use him to get her out of this situation? And for a long time in the film, it feels like that might happen. And it sort of does in the original Robert Towne ending. She gets away. right? It's a happy Hays Code ending, but
well, yeah.
which would have happened if you made this film in the 30s or the 40s. But yeah, the fact that she
all the way through the 60s, honestly, I think
truly,
it would have. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It was totally an invention of Polanski to want to end it that way. But and with Rosemary's Baby, you look at that one too. He's all about the punch of an ending, really, with this central actress. But
yes, that's true.
But
and then you just kind of quietly shuffle out of the theater.
Yes. Oh my God.
Stunned into silence.
It's really, really dark. But the fact that she'll forever be stuck is just it's so sad, and she doesn't have enough power to get herself out of that situation, because the men in power will always win. That's kind of the core of the movie.
Yeah. It's something that I think audiences in the 70s were more receptive to than they would have in past decades, or honestly even future decades. Like, I'm thinking about now and how people would respond to it, and it would get like a C- cinema score or something.
Can you imagine? People would be like, Faye Dunaway needed more lines. She was pausing too much. Give her a big monologue.
Also, is she really a lead?
Oh my God. So much
that
of
whole
that.
discussion.
I also want to bring up the My Sister, My Daughter famous scene when Jake finds out about her and everything that's been going on, and she was the one who made him slap her. That was Faye Dunaway's instruction. So she again leaning into it, knowing what is right for the moment to
directing
make it
herself.
Intense. Directing herself, into that performance and figuring out what felt real and authentic to the scene.
Yes, I agree. And it's also another one of those things like we were talking about with Diahann Carroll, where it feels like, she's built up so much great of a, foundation for this character. And then by the end, it's all sort of coming out in these big emotional moments.
Yeah.
And that moment in the house is just very uncomfortable to watch, and how she's really having to, I guess, reveal the awful truth of everything. It all just kind of comes pouring out of her in this very uncomfortable way, but she is so locked into that scene that it's riveting, I think. Riveting
the entire movie. I really, really love Faye Dunaway in this. And you started to talk about, her career at the beginning, and how, this was very different from Bonnie and Clyde, but how she had made movies in between. But a lot of those movies they weren't hits. They weren't, what she could really, really do. So I'm so happy that she got Chinatown, even though it proved to be a very fraught, challenging production. I am happy that she's here, because she's my favorite performance in the movie.
Yeah, really, really great performance. And sort of like I said in the beginning, it's slightly different from what is asked of the other actresses here, but I think no less fully committed and no less authentic either. Even if in the beginning it feels like she might be putting on a kind of persona, it ultimately, by the end of the movie, you feel like you really have gotten to know this woman on a deep level, and you really sympathize with her more than anyone else in the film.
Yeah, I agree. And that persona is what she has to create in order to survive, and you understand that by the end of the movie.
Totally. Okay, let's move on to the great Valerie Perrine for Lenny. So Valerie Perrine has lived a very fascinating life. There was a profile on her recently in the Hollywood Reporter. I don't know if you saw that. It's sort of like checking in on her, and it just lays out like how much she's cheated death. Like her fiance accidentally shot and killed himself, and then she was invited to a party in Los Angeles, which ended up being the one where Sharon Tate was murdered by the Manson family. To bring that back up, that's wild. So to get into her background, she was a dancer in Las Vegas. She was very open about her body, and in Playboy, things like that. She played a porn star in her first film, Slaughterhouse-5, and she did The Last American Hero, and then Lenny is only her third role in film. And I also think, sort of knowing about her openness, but also the darkness in her past is kind of important when we're talking about this role in this film. And I think ultimately is maybe what made her a perfect choice to play Honey Bruce. So Lenny is about the famous stand-up comedian Lenny Bruce, who was popular in the 50s and 60s for his outspoken stand-up routines, which often got him in trouble with the police. And he's played here by Dustin Hoffman. And Valerie plays Honey, who was a stripper and eventually married Lenny, and they had a daughter together. But their relationship was quite tumultuous, you could say, over time due to varying reasons, including his mouth getting him in trouble and just their sort of dependency on drugs. There's a lot to talk about here as well. So let's talk Lenny. I know you're a big Bob Fosse fan. So I'm also just curious your thoughts on Lenny as a film too, and what you think of Valerie Perrine.
Yeah, so I am a big Bob Fosse fan. I do really like this movie, but I don't love it as much as my beloved All That Jazz, which
sure
some days could be my favorite movie of all time, or Cabaret, which I really love. But I think there's plenty to like about it, including, mainly Alan Hymes' editing. He also edited All That Jazz, and I think watching both of these together, or if you do a double feature, like, it is really perfect. I love the black and white cinematography. I agree with you. I think that Valerie Perrine, knowing the darkness of her past and her personal life, when combined with her inherent openness, is crucial to getting more out of her performance here as Honey. I think this performance is absolutely devastating. I loved her in it. I loved her warmth and how vulnerable and open she was the entire time. And I think when you have a film that is stylized like this, where it's not your traditional biopic, it is not cradle to grave Wikipedia, it feels more like a documentary in how these interviews from the present are intercut with his stand-up and with scenes from the past and his relationships. And in particular, I think that because of her openness and because of her ability to tap into that darkness, Valerie Perrine really, really succeeds in those interview moments. Those, I feel like, are some of her strongest scenes in the movie, where you just have a close-up on her expressive face. Sometimes it's not even center of frame. Sometimes it's off to the side or at a low angle. And you just feel everything that this woman has been through. I love that you brought up the Hollywood Reporter article, because that was a great profile that really, I think, brought up a lot that was really important. But the fact that we have back-to-back connections to the Manson murders is so bizarre, truly. But yeah, I'm glad that she is able to channel her pain into something so productive and open and honest. It's very different when you think about the way that she took her pain and put it into film, and how Polanski did that, really. I
know.
So I loved her performance here, and I really like this movie. I really do, though. Just, if Fosse makes a movie, typically I'm in.
Including Star 80. That's a tough one.
We might bring up Star 80 a little bit later.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Wow. All right. So I don't have a super strong relationship with Valerie Perrine compared to other nominees here. And I think it's kind of just a matter of not seeing a lot of her other films. I'm sure I saw the first Superman movie at some point, but it was long enough ago that I don't have a super strong memory of it. Either way, even if she just had this one performance, she would have made her mark on film, I think, because she's incredible in Lenny.
Yeah.
I just like Diahann Carroll and Claudine, I think this also could have been a very two-dimensional performance and a character that we've seen before. You know, the wife, the addict, the stripper, you know, you can put all these labels onto her, but I think she's really able to expand upon what's on the page and make her a fully formed human. I mean, the film maybe isn't ultimately about Honey, you know, and I would say that she probably has the least impact compared to her other nominees here, although Faye comes surprisingly close just from looking at Screen Time Central in terms of like raw data of screen time. But she really gives every scene just very natural air that feels so honest and almost documentary like, especially those interview sequences. It almost feels like Valerie herself is like commenting on the character in how much it just feels like someone with wisdom now kind of reflecting and commenting on her choices. I think that's what sort of creates for me the feeling that this is almost like Honey Bruce herself in a documentary, and she feels like a tragic character despite the fact that also in so much of the film she's laughing, she's having a good time, you know. But I think with the way that Fosse sort of structures the film, there's also this impending doom feeling to it. Like this is about like how it all went wrong for Lenny versus like here's just the story of what happened in a sort of standard boring biopic way, you know.
Yeah. And I think that the fact that when we meet Honey, she's this vivacious dancer who is getting all of this attention, right? All eyes are on her. She has great hair. She is just full of life. And that makes it more difficult to see her lose her spirit, to lose her way, and to experience all of that pain. In order for a fall of a character in a film to be truly great, they have to be on a high at some point in the film, right? You couldn't just have her be fully at this low, like rock bottom, like how Marilyn was portrayed in Blonde, for example. Like you have to see the character as someone who is strong or who has some wins in her life in order to feel, I think, the pain of the fall. So I think that that's done really well by both Fosse and Perrine here for Honey. And yeah, I love this character, and I love how, you know, when they get into a car accident and she has, you know, suspicions of his infidelity, and we get this cut to him on stage joking about that and sort of discrediting her, but she knows what he's doing. She is much smarter than he gives her credit for, and maybe that the credit she even is able to give herself. So I think the scenes when we first meet her, she seems so sweet and so open, but there's so much more to her. There is like a strength and an intelligence there that he doesn't necessarily see, and that makes it all the more heartbreaking.
Yeah, I know. And just the interview scenes, going back to that, you know, like the mix of emotions that she brings to those scenes. Like there's this one point where the interviewer is asking like, what was it about him? And she just kind of smiles and she's almost embarrassed, and she's just like, well, he was just, I don't know, huggable.
Yeah.
I love those interview scenes, but honestly, like through most of the film, she just has this very naturalistic approach. It doesn't feel like Valerie Perrine as an actress has a technique that she sort of refined over the years. She's obviously quite young here, not only age-wise, but in her career, but there's just nothing forced. It feels easy and raw and real, which is obviously, to bring it back, similar to others in this category where it's almost uncomfortably real. And it does make me wish she had slightly more to do in the film, because it maybe is debatable whether she is really leader supporting when we get towards the end, and it really is like, this is the Lenny show. But she just brings this very kind of like an effervescent quality, and I think she makes her attraction to Lenny also feel natural. And I imagine it's not easy to kind of live in that high and that sort of happiness and that giggly quality take after take after take, which I imagine Bob Fosse is like demanding a lot of her. Kind of like when you have Bob Fosse staring you down, to do that and still feel like she's just this spontaneous person and then not come across as like phony. There's never a false note for me.
Yeah, me either. And I think the way that she does oscillate between this smiley happiness and sadness with these twinges of regret, maybe it's difficult. I think sometimes like you start to see her wonder Like, was this the right decision for me at times? And I think that's really powerful. I also love what she does when she tries to distract the interviewer. So she does this twice in the film where she asks if he wants to see a picture. So there's a key moment when she says, "Do you want to see a picture of Kitty?" Like when she was a baby, like she was so cute. And you can tell that it's not just because she wants the interviewer to see a picture of her daughter to get us there narratively. It's because it's a difficult conversation for her, and that's her way of deflecting. And I think it's a really brilliant moment from Perrine, how she does that so subtly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is in those sudden switch moments that I find a lot of value in her performance. Like, also there's this kind of quiet conversation towards the middle of the film after they go off to California, where he's trying to get her to kind of have a threesome and sort of introduce that dynamic into their relationship, which is not outright said in that moment, but it's kind of this quietly heartbreaking scene where he's manipulating her into it by also like asking if she loves him, you know, and she sort of has to passively agree to it to please him. And I feel like her fragility there and her vulnerability is really well done without sort of drawing attention also to this being like a standout scene, but it's ultimately an important one and definitely a turning point in their relationship. And you do feel like you're on her side as well, which we've been talking about a lot already, but even if this is about Lenny, you can really feel the sympathy go more towards her.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the turning point in the movie. And he's so cruel to her and very hard on her when she's behaving in a way that he theoretically expects her to. Like, he sort of sets these impossible standards for her, so you can see why she would react in the way that she does. And I think another heartbreaking scene from her is when she's on the phone with him and needs more money. Oh my God. That's like, I think I prefer some of her more subtle scenes in the interviews, but this is when I think you really feel her desperation, and I think her power as an actress emotionally, and how she really does feel like honey, and she's just so out of it. It's really, really heartbreaking.
Yeah, that is a huge scene for her. And yeah, like when she doesn't even know that she called him, not that he called her, and that whole thing. And when she's like, "Lenny, what's shaken?" And it's just, it's really tough.
God, it is.
And she's in such a fragile emotional state, and she is obviously like kind of altered in some way, either from drinking or drugs or both, but it's very uncomfortable and feels almost voyeuristic in a way that is, again, similar to the next nominee we'll be discussing, but she totally nails it. That feeling of just being on the brink, you know, and not quite breaking down, but I think it's like gonna dissolve into tears the minute that she hangs up. And that's probably the scene that got her the nomination, on top of all the great work that she puts in leading up to it. But that is really, really tough. This is also a performance that reminded me of another nominee that I talked about in the 60s, which was Lee Remick in Days of Wine and Roses. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's
I could see that.
Really one of those, like, someone who's really just suffering in this kind of cycle of addiction and, you know, being with this person who is not good for her ultimately, and with someone who does not understand her needs and what she's going through and what she needs to heal. You know, he just doesn't care in both of those cases. And I think it's very emotional to even think about that scene. It's one of these things where it's just someone on the brink and you want to reach out and kind of help this person, and you sadly kind of realize that she might not have other people in her life who she can depend on for that. Yeah,
you really do, I think, just want to reach through the screen and give her a hug or help her. But it doesn't feel, I don't know, the performance doesn't feel extreme to me. Like, it doesn't feel like she's over the top melodramatic. It just feels like that is her experience as Honey. And I think the final shot that we get of her in the movie, like you said, it sort of becomes a film that is, like the title suggests, about Lenny Bruce. And as he starts to deteriorate more, we see more of him. But the final shot that we get of her in the movie, just that close up on her face, you can just see, like, this woman has lived a life. And the fact that she's able to just communicate all of that just in one final shot of her character, I think is really, really powerful and compelling.
It really is. I think she also mentions in the maybe final scene that she has, at least of dialogue in interviews, of, she says, it's like that lady alcoholic in I'll Cry Tomorrow. And I was like, I know that reference.
Oh, yes. Is she a listener?
Susan Hayward. Truly. I mean, it's like she thought that she could sort of kick the habit. And it's the idea that, like, I'll fix myself tomorrow, you know, but then tomorrow comes and then she can't quite break it. And she is back into her old habits. Really tough. Yeah. And I think her final maybe moment of dialogue is when she says he was just so damn funny, you know, and she's even just saying that through tears, but she really makes an impact here. And I know this is kind of like technical Oscar stuff that gets kind of boring, but I think this is kind of a performance where another actress, if they're not giving it as much as Valerie gives it, it's a performance that you could justify being in supporting.
Yeah.
And the idea of, like, slipping into the background. But because of her performance, she makes herself a leading lady alongside Dustin.
I think so, for sure. I was thinking a lot about, in that article, she mentioned one of her bigger regrets was turning down Blowout, the Brian De Palma film. And I sort of started to imagine, you know, if she was in that movie, what would it have been like? And then I thought, you know, what if Nancy Allen was in this movie? And not to disparage her at all, but I do think I can see it being that, like, more of the supporting role, or maybe not getting to the place that Valerie Perrine was able to take it to because of her personal experiences as an actress and just as a human in the world. Yeah.
I wish that I had more opportunities to talk about her. This is another one of those where it's a bummer to me that she was a one and done ultimately, but you know, she had a great career ultimately, and I'm glad she got this nomination. Okay.
Here we go.
Brace yourself. All right, it's time to talk about our final losing nominee, Gena Rowlands in A Woman Under the Influence. This is a big one, folks. I'm sweating just thinking about it.
I
know. So Gena Rowlands is one of those kind of unparalleled actresses, and is actually in a similar boat for me as, like, Liv Ullmann or Isabelle Huppert nowadays too, where they only get like 1 or 2 Oscar nominations in their career. They don't win. Maybe they get honorary awards later in their career, but their Oscar performance is not in any way really indicative of their talent as actresses, and also, like, their influence on future generations who look up to them, you know? So this is one of those cases where it's like, yes, she is an Oscar-nominated actress and all of that, but she's more than that.
Yeah.
Truly. So Gena Rowlands, she'd done theater work and a lot of TV in the 50s and 60s, while also married to John Cassavetes, the great independent film director, and the bulk of what she would become known for were her collaborations with him, starting with A Child is Waiting, and then Faces and Machine Gun McCain, Minnie and Moskowitz, and then A Woman Under the Influence, with more to come, including her other Oscar-nominated performance in Gloria in 1980. And she really got so many, you know, incredible showcases in his films, but arguably none quite as impactful as A Woman Under the Influence, which was also not an easy pitch for studios in 1974. None of them wanted to produce it, according to Cassavetes himself. He said they all dismissed the idea of wanting to see, like, a crazy middle-aged dame is kind of what people would say to him, which is terrible, but also not true, because I certainly do. I would like to see it.
Me too.
I think you would too.
Every movie.
But, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, he basically went broke financing it and struggled to find distribution for it. So he did it himself, grassroots style. And it kind of made a killing in the art house theaters and college campuses and festivals and all that. So let's get into it. A Woman Under the Influence is about a 40-something housewife, Mabel, played by Gena Rowlands, who is very eccentric and often seems lost in her own mind. And we come to recognize that she clearly has some sort of undiagnosed psychological disorder, perhaps, which has not been treated at all. And she lives with her blue-collar husband, played by Peter Falk, and their 3 kids, and her behavior starts to impact the lives of her family, and to such a point that a decision is made that she be institutionalized. And there's more after that, but I'm sure we'll dive into it. So, Gena Rowlands, A Woman Under the Influence, a very celebrated performance, even though she doesn't win an Oscar for it. It's, yeah, one of those performances in this category that really still holds up today and is often discussed as one of the greatest of all time. Wherever you want to start, let me know your thoughts on Gena Rowlands in this mammoth of a performance.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's difficult to find a place to start, I think, because the performance itself is just so all-encompassing. I think it's impossible not to be moved by it and really sucked into the world of the Longhettis. And I think that is because the way that John Cassavetes films this movie, it is like he just put a camera in a random home on the street and you are just watching their lives unfold. Like, it feels so true. And one of the things he said about this, so in Cassavetes on Cassavetes, this book I have, he said that he doesn't think audiences were he didn't think audiences were satisfied with touching the surface of people's lives. He said that they needed to get into their lives. They needed to get into the subject. And that is what he does. We feel like we really not understand her, because I think what's fantastic about this performance, and there are many things, is that she's impossible to understand because she's experiencing something that we are not necessarily familiar with personally. But at the same time, you can't help but completely feel like you do get her and you support her and you feel like you understand her, but you don't at the same time. And that's such a tricky thing, I think, for an actress to be able to achieve. And what she's doing here, it's so physical. And that was what stood out to me the first time that I watched the movie. So I first watched this in college, and I just remember thinking, this woman has figured out her own style of choreography, of how this character moves, how she experiences people interacting with her or things that are in her orbit, and how she doesn't just respond, emotionally. She responds physically, with her hands, with her arms, in the way that she dances and she moves through a scene. And I mentioned with Faye Dunaway in her performance, it's like you're seeing her kind of walk on a tightrope the entire time. This performance, Gena Rowlands is off the tightrope and there's no net beneath her, but she's midair. Like, that is how I think of this. It is a completely courageous, vulnerable performance, unlike anything I've ever seen before in my entire life. And when I watched it this time, I really just thought, I wrote this in my Letterboxd review, but there are some movies where you can feel yourself starting to cry. It's coming, like the ending of It's a Wonderful Life. I always know, the tears are coming. I'm going to start sobbing when he's singing Auld Lang Syne. But this one, I just had tears streaming down my face, and I had no idea where they came from or what I was feeling. It was just, I just was swept up in her world. And that is the power and the beauty of this performance. It's ugly and beautiful all at once.
Yeah, absolutely. When I first saw this film, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, actually, it totally floored me in terms of just the level of emotional honesty, how heavy and obviously depressing it is to see this woman suffer and not get the help that she needs. And I was just so blown away by Gena Rowlands' work. And like the best John Cassavetes film, it just feels like you're watching a real woman who is having a nervous breakdown before your eyes, and you're just powerless. You can't help her in any way. You just have to watch and see how it plays out. And for a movie that I think is generally like a masterwork, I've only seen this a few times because I physically cannot bring myself to watch it again unless I need to, you know? And even though I'd seen it, you know, that first time, just watching it again this week was just as effective. What she does here, I think, is beyond just playing a role. I think she really taps into something very raw and desperate and real, which is this desire to be okay, you know?
Yeah.
And on some level, it's like she knows that something is wrong. She may not be able to put her finger on it. She may not know why she seems to kind of freak people out with her energy and her behavior, but she knows something isn't right. And all she wants to do is please her husband, to give her kids, you know, this nice life. And she shows that warmth and that humanity with her family, even in these kind of beautiful, tender moments. I think there's so much beauty in that, but then there's also so much of this is like a dark cloud that's sort of hanging over her. You know, like in every gesture she makes with her face, with her hands and her movements, it all feels so manic and untethered, but it never verges into overacting for me. It never feels like she's kind of overshooting with trying to play a mentally ill person. And she also, I think, doesn't play her as kind of like a weird, unknowable person either. Because even though I may not be experiencing like the same condition that she's experiencing, I feel like I totally understand her and her need to be happy and to be loved by her family, and how her insecurities are kind of plaguing her to the point of making her overcompensate, you know, and it feels like she really connected to it. So it doesn't feel like one of those situations where an actor is playing a mentally ill person. She's just playing Mabel.
Yeah. She is Mabel, right? Like Mabel doesn't feel like a character to me, which is odd to say because she is, but Mabel is this fully like emotional, nervous, beautiful human. Like that is who Mabel is. And I think that what Gena Rowlands does is she makes her, and certainly Cassavetes does as well, through, you know, what he's able to do as a filmmaker and his honesty and what he loves to include in his movies. But she is the one who makes her a real person. And there are so many great stories I think we can get to when we talk about the ending of the film and when she comes back from the hospital, of choices that Gena deliberately made that were not in the script, that were not what Cassavetes initially intended the character to look like or what he wanted her to be. And I think that just shows again how well she knew this woman and how she wanted us to know her and how she wanted us to see her. And I am happy for her and for us that this is a film that we can, you know, watch forever, because initially it was going to be a play. That's crazy. And she said, no, I'm not doing that many times a week. I can't do it, which I completely understand. Totally, but for me, the scenes with her that always just strike me and make me feel like I'm going to throw up, really. Like that's the response that I have watching this movie sometimes. I feel nauseous. Or when she's talking to her kids. Like I know. I really lose it every time. There's a really beautiful moment, sad early in the movie, when she asks them, like, when you see me, like, do you see your mom? Or do you think of me as dopey or mean? And one of the kids says, no, you're smart, you're pretty, you're nervous too. And you just, you know that the kids see her and the way that they see her, and how all of these qualities and traits that she has, like, they're handled so delicately, but they're just, you can't hide them from your family, right? Like, and this movie doesn't try to hide them from the characters. That's the interesting thing about it, is, and that's why it's so visceral, is that you see the children and how involved they are in so many of those darker scenes, but that's how it is, right? Like, that's how you would imagine this to play out in the real world. In the scene when she invites the dad and his kids over for that play date, oh my god, it breaks my heart every time, because everything just starts to go wrong. It starts out fine and just everything just completely derails, and she says, "I'm awfully sorry, I really wanted it to be nice."
Yeah, that's kind of the thesis of the whole film.
Exactly.
Really. You know, yeah, so many scenes that we can point to here with with that dynamic. When she's going out to the bar because her husband is going to be late coming home. First of all, just that scene of her just kind of sitting at the dining room table and just kind of lost in thought is very haunting. And going out to the bar where we see some more of her tics, you know, where she makes these kind of odd noises, and she meets this stranger who she is kind of uncomfortably intimate with right off the bat, just like no boundaries at all. There's this just really disturbed feeling that you get watching her, because she's so untethered. There's just no grounding to her at all. And there are moments where it feels like, you know, like a 70s version of Vivien Leigh in Streetcar, or like Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard, where she's just in a different world from everyone else, and other people have to kind of accommodate around her, and she's just so transfixing in how committed she is, and so free of vanity at all. And it is theatrical, but again, not in a way that feels like old-fashioned. It feels very alive, even today, as much as it does in the 70s.
I completely agree. It doesn't feel over the top to me at all. And I mean, neither did Vivien Leigh in Streetcar for me. So I just love those types of performances, and I do see the connection between the two. And one of the connections that I felt from these women and their performances and those characters is how they're thrust into very mature adult situations, and at the same time feel like children. Like, I have this want to care for them, and this feeling that, like, they are totally out of their depth. They need help. They need someone to step in and help them, and they just aren't able to navigate these situations. And I like that you mentioned, like, that scene that starts at the dinner table. The dinner table is so crucial to so many moments in the movie, and it feels so perfect with the thesis of the movie, but what Cassavetes is also trying to say about domestic life and what women experience, like being stuck in the home, and the fact that everything takes place at this space that is supposed to be communal and positive, but also certainly wrapped up in those traditional familial structures, feels really, really important to her as a character. And I think so many of those difficult moments throughout the film, having them take place there and having it all escalate in that central location, I feel very, very connected to that and to her. And the fact that they shot this sequentially, so Gena Rowlands and Peter Falk, I watched an interview with them through the Criterion channel. It was wonderful. Highly recommend. But they talk about that, about how, and she's so self-deprecating. She's like, that made it easy for me. And I'm like, I'm sure this was the opposite of easy for you.
Walk in the park,
cool.
yeah.
But yeah, I think having it shot in that way and really building up those emotions around our locations is really important to feeling tapped into and connected to that world.
Yeah, it feels like a true journey. Another great dinner table scene is the kind of forced smile as she's greeting all the other men who he brings home for a meal, and there's so much tension because you don't know what she's gonna say, what she's gonna do, and this is sort of like her version of playing the sort of happy housewife, you know, because she knows that's what's expected of her, but I think she makes it also obvious that she isn't exactly in the best mood, but she's giving it her best effort. And at the dinner table where she's like asking everybody's name, and it's so uncomfortable because some of them she's met before, but she doesn't seem to have a memory of that. And she just doesn't have a whole lot of social awareness of how she's coming off. And it's heartbreaking, like when some of the guys start laughing at her. Some of her gestures too, like as she's listening to the conversation, like touching her face and like doing that okay sign and sort of like making eyes with her husband. And you just want her to make it through the lunch okay and like without embarrassment. And it almost happens. And then she asks one of the men to dance with her, and she's just like insistent. And then her husband yells at her, and the way that she registers that fear, like she's literally like stunned into silence, and you almost want to look away. And especially after they've all left and they argue, and she's like, I just want your friends to be comfortable. I'm not like those other women with their noses in the air. And she kind of like puts on this upper crust sort of voice, and she's like imitating them. You can tell through all of this that she just wants everything to be nice and normal and peaceful. And the line where she says, tell me what you want me to be, I can be that.
Yeah.
And the whole sort of like tenor of her voice is softened. Oh my God. It's such a live wire act that she's pulling off. And you could feel like a distance with this character, but I feel like you just get such a clear understanding of who she is.
It's hard to say, you know, this is the scene when I first noticed how powerful she was in this film, or that I was experiencing something differently. But that was, I remember, and even again on this rewatch, a scene where it feels, I think it's easy to see her strength in the scenes where she is a bit more violent, or the outbursts feel a bit stronger, or it's more live wire than some of the smaller scenes. But here you really get a combination of, you're so worried about what she's going to say next, but also it's so quiet and vulnerable when she is just almost telling him, like, make it easy for me. I need one thing to be easy. I need to just figure out the way that I need to be to make things peaceful for everyone and for myself. And you know it's not really possible for her, which makes it all the more heartbreaking when she just is looking for a way in, really. And you know that her husband loves her, but at the same time, I mean, he's very difficult too, and would be a challenging person for, you know, anyone to be with. But I think the love that they have for each other feels very real, because it's so complicated, and that makes it feel more human and not like it's characters in a movie.
Exactly. And, you know, like after he's threatening to have her committed, that moment where she reminds him, like, they know each other well enough, like, till death do us part. And it leads to that intervention of sorts, where the doctor comes, where I just like fully forget to breathe watching it, as they're all trying to navigate a very, very delicate situation. And she's sort of like negotiating her way through it, because on some level she understands what's happening, and it feels, just watching her, it feels like full improv almost, with like how live and in the moment it is. And her horrible mother-in-law, who she hates,
I know,
who just yells at her that she's crazy. And Mabel just like has such venom for her in return. Like there's no love lost between them. That is.
Yeah. Oh, it's hard it's like hard to come up with the words, I think, to describe some of these scenes, because it's a strange experience watching this movie. Sort of like how I talked about, I didn't realize I was crying until suddenly I was. It's like forgetting to breathe, or you are so fully immersed, like you want to look away, but you just can't. It's like you're too far gone at this point. When you're watching it, and that's why it's such a tough watch, but it's such a rewarding experience as a watch, I think, because of this performance. But that scene in particular, Gena Rowlands talks about how this like push-pull she describes it as sort of a love triangle, but not in a love triangle, not in the way that you would expect to hear a love triangle being talked about, as a son being put between two women, his mother and his wife, and how that push and pull is something that a lot of women experience. But here it's like, what if you cranked that up and turned it into one of the most violent, volatile scenes that you could have? And I think that mother-in-law, who is awful, is played by John Cassavetes' mom.
Yes,
which I think
I
is
know.
crazy, right? It's like,
yeah.
my God. And the contrast between her mom and his mom is really interesting.
Right.
But yeah, I think in that moment, it's hard to pick like a best scene for her, or where I think I am clicked into what she's doing the most. But this scene, this is the one where I think I just said that about another scene too, which is so funny, but
No, it's
it's just how
it's
it
true
is.
of the whole film.
This is the scene where I think to myself, I've never seen anything like this. Or if I've seen another actor try something like this, it feels phony or inauthentic, or like they're reaching for something, or it's way too over the top. It hits a perfect note. I have no idea how she does it. You feel her pain, you need to look away, but you want to help her. It's like that in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is the greatest acting I've seen in my whole life.
Yeah.
That's how I feel
I
in
said that
moment.
on Twitter. That's probably how the kids who played her kids probably whispered that to her
Oh my
after a
God.
take.
I love it.
Yeah. I mean, like when she's like crossing her fingers together, trying to like ward
Mhm.
off the doctor, when she's like fully having an emotional breakdown, is so visceral, and is like trying to negotiate her way out of this situation. And then she becomes combative and she's like raising her fists. And like you said, I feel like so much could be like overdone in this performance and almost cartoonish.
Yeah.
Right. But
Yes.
for as big as the performance is, it never feels forced, which is like this magic trick. And it's one of those, for me, it's like, I don't know how Gena Rowlands shook off this character. Like when you commit to a character on this level and play this level of honesty and just mental deterioration, I wouldn't know how to let that go. So like huge credit to her. I don't know how much how much it stayed with her, but ugh.
Oh my God. Yeah. Like, what do you need after this? Like, she needs like a puppy and some ice cream and to go on a nice long vacation. I don't even know what you need after something like this. This would,
I know.
whew, it's something that, it's singular. And even some of the greatest performances I think of that venture into the over the top, like a Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood. Like there's still something to it that feels like a character. This isn't like that. It's completely different.
Yeah. And then you kind of contrast all of that for like an hour and a half of her kind of manic energy. We go 6 months later to where she's been institutionalized, and when she finally comes back, and it's this big gathering of her family, and she seems like a different person, like very withdrawn and just solemn. But I feel like you also are seeing that she is still dealing with a kind of depression. Like when she tears up when she sees her kids, but it's not like happy tears necessarily. It's like just like a melancholy that she feels.
Yeah.
She still seems disturbed on some level, and it's kind of like this new shading of Mabel that somehow for me even feels more affecting than what we saw before in the first half. Like when she's in the living room and she just says, "I'm very happy to see my family."
Yeah.
But she doesn't actually seem happy. Like it's really heartbreaking because clearly something happened to her at the institution. And it's frustrating when you see everyone else just kind of like dismissing her feelings when she says she just wants to go to bed with Nick. And when she tells her father to please stand up for her, and he just doesn't even know what to do. He doesn't know what to say. You really feel the despair.
You really do. And I love that Cassavetes never takes the camera with her when she's institutionalized. Like, we don't see that. So that is a part of her life that is private. We only see the aftermath and how she responds to coming home. And this is another scene in the movie where I just truly lose it. Like,
Yeah.
I feel physically ill when I watch it because I feel like at this point I know her and I'm seeing something that is so private and so emotionally naked. I feel like, but it doesn't feel like it's voyeuristic in any way. Like, I don't feel like he's putting the camera in a place that feels exploitative or anything like that. I just feel like this is something that is hers. But at the same time, I think there's something there where, yes, something probably happened to her there, but also that I think she feels like a failure as a mother that she left them. Like, that's what I get from that. And what I read about Cassavetes that I thought was so interesting was that he really thought she would react differently when she came home. So he expected this character to be like very angry and hostile and like everything was wrong and that the audience would like connect with that and see that. But instead she was expressing this fear. And he said specifically, Jenna's interpretation showed me how frightened Mabel was. As a matter of fact, when we looked at the dailies, she said, "What do you think? I'm at a loss. Did we go too far?" And he told her he didn't like it. And he found it hard to watch. He thought it was something that he maybe shouldn't have put this character through, because her performance took it to another level where suddenly he felt like he went too far. But then what he ended up saying was that he grew to love those scenes so much because of what she did there. Instead, she incorporated like fear into the scenes and she took away any sort of pettiness that he expected this woman to have. And when you take that away, she suddenly becomes this incredibly vulnerable character without like any defensiveness. And that to him was much more powerful than any rendering he had previously explored with this character. So like she did that. That is so, and that is the right thing, I think, for this character. I can't imagine her coming home and reacting differently. Like she's just like this, again, like this meek woman who's been through something, but who you can just tell like something is off still with her, even though she's at home and her kids and her family being the most important thing, but she doesn't know how to react still. And I love that instead of being defensive, she's vulnerable. And she saw that as what the character would actually do and how she would respond to that situation.
It feels honest. Yeah. And what really gets to me is after everyone leaves and she goes and cuts herself because she's out of options and she just wants to kind of externalize her pain. I think that level of pain that she's experiencing, I think, is so real. And I hate seeing how she's treated after that, where he slaps her. It really hurts to see, for as realistic as it is. It's a scene that really gets to me.
Me too. It's so violent and the camera is unflinching. It is so close on them and on the kids. Like that is really what gets me. Like how the kids, they don't go hide like in their rooms, like they're clinging to their parents as they're fighting. And that feels like so, again, honest. It's like they're looking to their parents for protection while their parents are in an all-out brawl. Like they don't know how to handle that. And when the violence of that scene comes to an end and it slows down and you see Mabel next to her son and he's scared and she says like, "I'll be okay, I'm a grown-up." Oh my God, it kills me.
Yeah. And it's just the way that it ends, I think, is just this beautiful kind of expression of love from her kids who just want nothing more than to see their mother be okay and be that fun person that they know her to be. And it's just so tender. And she makes that like offhand joke to Nick about how she's nuts and she doesn't even know how it started. and that maybe she was just tired. And for as sort of visceral and bracing as the movie is, I think it's a bittersweet note to end on as they just sort of clean up the house together and just do these kind of menial tasks. Like, you feel like things may be as okay as they can be, even if she's not magically cured of everything necessarily.
Yeah, I like the ambiguity. I like how it's just sort of like life goes on. We don't know if this family is going to be okay. It doesn't have this like pretty ending that's tied up with a bow, but this sort of film never could have that ending. It would eliminate the authenticity that you've experienced for the past 2 hours, I think. So I think the ending is very smart, even if it's not as satisfying as some viewers may want.
Totally. Yeah, this is just one of those performances that is beyond this discussion and just the idea of her being Oscar nominated. This is just one of those like all-timers.
Yeah.
That's glad I got to finally talk about.
Oh my God, me too. I haven't ever talked about this on a show before. Probably for good reason. Like, it's a scary one to talk about. Like, it's intimidating because people love it so much and just the power of it. But I feel like we covered a lot of what we could. There's always more to say, but I feel like we did it justice, I think. I hope.
I think so, yeah. So, on that note, I think it's time to move on to our winner, Ellen Burstyn, in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Ellen Burstyn now getting her third Oscar nomination in 4 years. She's on a real hot streak, and here she gets her win. And I think this is a very natural progression from last week's episode where we talked about Ellen in The Exorcist, because it was during her experience on The Exorcist that she gets involved with Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. And this was, in many ways, Ellen Burstyn's blank check. Because Warner Brothers said they wanted to be in the Ellen Burstyn business. She said she wanted to make a film centering on like an everyday working woman, and her agent found this script for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, and she really connected to it, brought it to Warner Brothers. They also allowed her to choose her own director, and she was sort of steered to Martin Scorsese, who she saw with his film Mean Streets, and decided that he had the right sort of grit and sort of to bring the story some realism. I love that story because it's something that I've talked about in earlier decades of Best Actress, when someone like Katharine Hepburn or Gloria Swanson, Bette Davis, Joan Crawford, where they would really fight for themselves and be also given some power in sort of shaping the material. I feels like that sort of went away over time when Hollywood wasn't making as many women's pictures. So what Ellen Burstyn was able to do here at this time was incredibly rare. But let's talk about it. Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore is about a 30-something woman, Alice, living in New York with her deadbeat husband and their son. One day, very early on in the film, her husband gets in a car accident and dies, which prompts Alice to try and reinvent her life. And she goes on the road with her son, Tommy, with the intention of becoming a singer. So she tries that for a little while, and she gets involved with the wrong guy. So she hightails it out of town and lands in another town where she becomes a waitress, which is sort of where she, finds her people, you could say. So thoughts on the great Ellen Burstyn and her performance here in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore?
I love Ellen Burstyn in this movie. I think she's wonderful here. I thought a lot about Mildred Pierce, actually, when I was watching this, just this woman trying to like navigate her relationship with her child and with men who are treating her poorly, working in a diner, of course. I even think that Diane Ladd reminds me of the Eve Arden character. There are a lot of similarities that I found through this and Mildred Pierce, but I love how she was like her own EP on the movie and how she handpicked Scorsese for this, because this film, I think, is sort of crucial to understanding Scorsese's filmography and him reinventing himself and figuring out who he was and wanting to create what he saw around him, which was a 70s road movie. And I think that what Ellen Burstyn does here in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore is that we see a film that is all about her emotions, the way that she navigates relationships, moments of intense strife and chaos, but it just feels like this is a woman who is finally living her life, for better or for worse, right? Without this man who is absolutely horrible. Like, her first husband, my God, she just seems so exhausted. Like, her son Tommy has just a complete mind of his own. Nothing is good enough for her husband, and she is just trying so hard to be a good wife and a good mom, to the point where she literally starts talking to herself at the table and having a conversation, pretending to have a conversation with her husband, which I think just tells you everything. It's like, this woman is lonely. She's doing what she thinks she's supposed to be doing. And I'm sure that was really relatable for audiences at the time. And in a similar way, she thinks that finding her way back home, whatever that means, is going to bring her happiness and that things will be better. But with that opening sequence that Scorsese creates, which was inspired by The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, she never really can go back home again. She can't go back to that Monterey of her childhood. She has to find a new home for herself, and she has to do that through, you know, her new job that she has and through her new relationships and just figuring out how to start over. And I think that Burstyn really anchors this character. I believe her at every turn. I believe her exhaustion. I believe her moods at times, like when she just completely just reacts in a way that, you know, feels authentic to the character. It might feel like a lot for you as a viewer watching. It's like, why is she crying? Why is she reacting this way? But this woman has been through a lot, and she's trying to find her way when she hasn't really had the support system in place. There's a moment later in the film when she says something like she needed to be taken care of by a man, or that her first husband took care of her. And then she realizes, oh, he didn't take care of me. I just thought he was taking care of me. I thought that was what I needed. And I think there's a power in that. And this movie always makes me cry too, in a different way than A Woman Under the Influence. I just feel very moved, I think, by her journey and by Burstyn's performance.
Yeah, this is a great performance. Definitely, for me, her finest performance yet. And it helps that she obviously has more to do here than in The Last Picture Show, but also The Exorcist, which is sort of about her until it sort of isn't towards the end. Here, she's just fully showing what she's made of as an actress. And she's just an everyday woman trying to live her life, stumbling along the way, but always just trying to move forward and do the best she can with what she has. And there are versions of this story that could be a little precious or kitschy or sentimental in just trying to show a hardworking single mom. I'm thinking of Reba,
oh my God.
A single mom who works too hard, who loves her kid but never stops. No disrespect to Reba, but
that played in my head. I could hear it suddenly.
Right. But there's maybe a bit of like a cheesiness there that I think this movie is able to sidestep, which, you know, it's still providing those earnest kind of emotions. But, you know, I think the same goes for her performance, where she's just so relaxed and lived in, and she has this sort of blue collar sensibility and a warmth, especially when she's dealing with her son, even when he's being impossible.
Oh my God, Tommy.
But also someone who's prone to those more explosive moments too. Like, even in the beginning, like when she's just yelling about how she hates Socorro, her hometown. I find that she's so gifted at providing so many different emotions at once, where she can be funny and charming, but then also melancholy and sort of short-tempered, all within like the same sentence even. And you just believe her emotional journey. And it's another thing that I have to chalk up to the actor's studio, I think, when she just seems so immersed in her character that, just like so many of the other nominees here, just doesn't feel forced in any way. She seems to me like maybe not precisely my mother necessarily, but like an aunt that I have, or like a friend, where it's like they're tough and they've been through some shit, but they're going to give it a go, and also kind of lead with humor too, and like empathy and this kind of desire for human connection. And she just makes the character feel very real and impulsive in her choices, even if Ellen herself has probably studied the script over and over again and done the character work. And her sort of process is probably very extensive, but she just kind of shakes it off and just feels like she's in the moment.
I completely agree. She really, really does. It feels like that Alice is this woman who is allowed to be so many different things. And I credit that to Scorsese too, who I think is sometimes looked at as a filmmaker who makes stories about men and stories for men. But this is a film where Alice as a character, like, this is how women are. Like, women are all different, but like the way that she reacts to everything just feels like that is exactly how someone could react in that situation if they've been through what she's been through with like her first husband, with Harvey Keitel, with figuring out how she's going to make enough money to support her son and truly be out on her own. And again, I feel like at the time that was probably really powerful for audiences to watch and connect with.
Yeah, and she really gets to show every sort of detail and crevice of this person. Like, even when she's sort of singing in the beginning, kind of like testing out whether she can make it as a singer, and she just is like at the piano. I love that she doesn't have the best voice.
Yeah,
but
I do too.
There's like also like a smokiness to it that is like kind of warm in a way, and it's, even if she admits, she's just like, well, it ain't Peggy Lee. And she has that kind of mocking sort of fun voice that she puts on in certain moments to sort of cope with the reality of things. And I feel like you really just, even from the beginning, get the sense of how meaningful her relationships are in her life.
Yeah.
Like, which I think really makes the rest of the film very rewarding in her ability to sort of just integrate and like make friends and these other relationships. And I feel like there aren't a lot of actresses who can have that very serious screen presence that Ellen Burstyn has, but still be warm and loving and like an everyday person, and also have that great rapport with her son. Like, there's so many things that she's juggling here.
Yeah.
But you can't really see the effort necessarily.
I completely agree. And she's funny in this movie too. Like, there are so many good comedic scenes, I think, especially between like how she reacts to her son. Oh my God. I always laugh like any of the scenes when they're in the car together.
I know.
Oh my God. They kill me.
And he's telling this like elaborate joke, and she doesn't have the appropriate reaction, and he just like launches into it again, and she's like, oh my God.
She's just over it. You can tell.
Yeah.
Which you totally would be. Again, like, it's not showing the type of mom that, you know, earlier audiences would have seen, like this perfect sort of Mrs. Miniver type of character. I had to include her just for you.
Thank you. Yes.
But this is how a person who is overworked, who is just very real, would react to her son being annoying and driving her crazy. Yeah. So I love those scenes too. I think she's great with Chris Christopherson as well. I like, you know, seeing her lighten up and be around a genuinely nice man. But when she finds out, when she says, "Did you hit Tommy?" And suddenly you see like what is important to her and how all of her past relationships with men come flooding back in that moment, and how ultimately what is the most important thing to her is caring for her family and providing for her son.
Right. For me, she's just such a great actor and reactor. Like, she really plays off other actors so well in the film. Like, even when she's like breaking down in front of the boss who she's hoping to audition as like a lounge singer. And I think one thing that Ellen Burstyn is so good at is she's always been so good at communicating the fragility of her characters and how they could easily just sort of break down at the drop of a hat. Not that they're like unstable necessarily, but a lot of her characters just feel deeply, and she can express that sort of like when she's defending herself when Harvey Keitel, a young Harvey Keitel, is coming on to her, but she has like that insecurity and a sadness and a desperation to sort of prove herself, and it's very rarely feels artificial to me what she's doing. And then of course when things get violent with Harvey Keitel, because it turns out he's married, I love that scene where she just talks with his wife who goes to visit her, and she's just so like empathetic and sweet
Yeah.
talking to her. It's not like this blowout fight that you might expect.
Yeah, there's so many great moments of hers, I think, through the film that just make this character feel just, I think, vital for the time, but just a perfect new sort of portrayal of moms in cinema.
Yeah.
You'll talk about many more mothers, I'm sure, throughout the series.
Yeah.
But I think she is a great one.
And I think very refreshing for audiences at the time, especially for women, seeing a sort of non-glamorous portrayal of motherhood and how it really is.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, even just like it works, the film works, I think, also as like that kind of workplace sitcom too, where she gets the waitressing job. That whole segment of the film, I think, is so fun. Shout out to Diahann Ladd.
Amazing.
As truly like the classic, like, no nonsense work friend.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot of Alice just kind of being stressed. And I haven't had like a waiter job before, but I have worked in food services. I worked at a deli. Fun trivia fact for the listeners.
Love
and
it.
yeah, the stress of that and like the stupid jokes and like the shitty customers and the sometimes annoying coworkers, very accurate. And her frustration there, I think, is very, very real.
Yeah. Everyone needs to work in food service or retail at some point in their lifetime, I think, to really understand. Just thinking about the diner and everything, and Diahann Ladd, I love the conversation that they have outside.
Yes.
And inside too. So they have two conversations. One where, Alice is late to work and they have this sort of heart to heart where she just like, my customers can wait. I'm talking to you. We're gonna get to the bottom of this. And then the scene where they're outside and they're like sitting out in the sun and the camera's really close on their profiles as they're just talking about how lonely they are and their lives and how difficult things are, but also you get this sense of how close they've become based on like what's happened throughout the film. So I love those moments. And then of course in typical cool Scorsese fashion, we get a cut and the camera is suddenly far removed from them and we just see them as these two people in this town.
Yeah, all of the relationships just feel so genuine. Mentioning the Chris Christopherson of it all, I did want to note, having also watched Star is Born recently, the 76 version, I will say Chris Christopherson has way better chemistry with Ellen Burstyn than Barbara.
I agree.
All due respect. But even in like that beautiful kind of slice of life scene where she's just sort of telling stories about her past with her brother and everything, and they're both just kind of vibing off each other's energies, is just very charming. And also her storytelling abilities, I think, is just, it's so spontaneous feeling. It feels genuine. And obviously there's some beautiful kind of like punchline / emotional moments towards the end that bring the performance home, like when she declares in front of the whole diner that she's a singer, and all that stuff, and she's as good as I am. That's how good I am. Really, really good in those little one-liners there. And then have that beautiful kind of final note with Tommy where they agree to stay where they are, and they both kind of assumed that the other person might want to go, but I just love that moment of recognition that they have, that like they've grown attached to this place. Really simple final note to end on.
I love that too. It's a perfect way to end the movie, just knowing that they found a place and it's going to be okay. They're still going to struggle, but they're in a much better place than where we started the film, and you can see them making a home there, having the type of life that they didn't have before.
She's a survivor.
She is.
To bring it back to Reba.
I love it.
I think on that note, we can get into why Ellen Burstyn won this Oscar. Gena Rowlands won the Golden Globe for drama. She won the National Board of Review. She was a runner-up at New York Film Critics. Ellen Burstyn was nominated for a Globe, as were the other three. Diahann Carroll was in Comedy Actress, but she actually lost that to Raquel Welch in The Three Musketeers.
Fascinating.
So there you go. Yes, but Leave All Men for Scenes from a Marriage was the New York Film Critics winner and the National Society of Film Critics. She was also nominated for a Golden Globe, but just as a side note, she was deemed ineligible because it had aired on TV as a series. So they had that rule in place. But there was a big campaign, as we know, to allow her to compete for the Oscar, where even some of these other nominees like Gena Rowlands and Ellen Burstyn signed the letter, but the Academy just didn't budge. If she was eligible, I'm guessing she gets in because there was a lot of passion for it, but yeah, here we are. We'll get to more questions about that later. But let's talk about why we think Ellen Burstyn was our winner, despite, when you look at the precursors, you could say that Gena Rowlands was maybe a front runner, perhaps. So what happened?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things really that happened here. One, I think there was probably a bit of an overdue narrative for Ellen Burstyn. Like, she's coming off of a year where she was in the biggest movie. Like, she was in The Exorcist and she didn't win. And all of the horror bias, I'm sure you guys got into that.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I think that the way that Burstyn talked about this movie and how important this role and character were to her and how important it was to see women portrayed this way on screen, I think that's a really powerful narrative to have. And her also, the fact that she was a producer on the movie, she found her director, like she had these pivotal roles to ensuring that this movie was successful and that it happened. And Gena Rowlands, she also was pivotal to making her movie happen. But when you look at Alice and when you look at Mabel, I think this is sort of an Academy story, tale as old as time, where Jenna's performance is incredibly difficult. And, we've talked about why it hit us and why we love it, but more women can probably relate to Alice, and her performance and Ellen's performance is probably a bit more palatable to your average voter. And they could have been, again, just more familiar with Burstyn and her work, and she had been there before. So that's kind of how I see it, of why she came out on top.
I definitely agree. When you look at it as like perhaps a 2-horse race, because, there's also other people here who could have contended, like Faye Dunaway, who's in a Best Picture winner,
Right.
and not winner, but nominee, close to winner, runner-up. I think she clearly could have contended, but I do think that there's just like something very easy and relatable and just fun to watch about Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore in a way that most of the other nominees here don't necessarily provide. And I do think that is a very important thing that you touched on, which is kind of her own way of contextualizing what this role means. Not only the fact that she advocated really was spearheading this film in many ways, but also that what the film represented, which was telling an honest story about working class women, that you kind of want to be a part of that campaign. Like, it feels kind of like a movement in a way.
Yeah.
So I think all of that really helped her. And yes, definitely she was building the narrative. It's kind of like this classic, almost like Cinderella kind of narrative that we see sometimes, where you get in your first time, welcome to the club, you're not going to win, but we like what we see. The second time, a really fascinating, she's like graduating up to lead, but there are some other things in the way that might provide, some stumbling blocks for her actually winning. And then there's a narrative on her third nomination of being like, okay, we missed the boat last time. Maybe we should have rewarded her that time because we really like what we're seeing now. Now we're going to reward you. Right place, right time. I think that's kind of what happened here. And ultimately, when you look at Gena Rowlands as maybe her biggest competition, I talked about it like they didn't have a lot of resources.
Yeah.
Ultimately. Especially compared to Warner Brothers.
Right, exactly. Another tale as old as time. Like, it comes down to that sort of thing often.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, in terms of the difficulty of watching A Woman Under the Influence, who knows, there may be some voters who didn't even watch it.
Yep, or didn't make it
who
through.
Or maybe,
yeah.
Right, yeah, who felt daunted even by other people saying that, like, it's really tough to watch. It's also 2.5 hours, so it's a big commitment in that respect too.
Yeah, and quick note on Chinatown and Faye Dunaway. I wonder how much Roman Polanski's press tour and interviews talking about her affected her campaign. I know she was able to overcome it shortly after with Network, but I wonder like how that affected her. And honestly, I kind of wonder what happened with Chinatown and the Academy, considering like people thought Jack had it sewn up, but it went to the man with the cat. And the towering
Not the man with the cat.
It's like the thorn in my side. It's fine, Art Carney. But the even worse than that, like the Towering Inferno winning cinematography. Good choices God, choices. Yeah. So yeah, I wonder about that too. But yeah, I think I do kind of I see what happened there.
Mm-hmm. And for the record, just to talk about Diahann and Valerie, both of them, just from looking at press from the time, were sort of considered also Rans. Ultimately, there was some discussion of whether Valerie should have been in supporting. Either way, incredible lineup. And if you've seen the actual announcement, obviously we know Ellen Burstyn was not there because she was on a play. She was on New York, obviously, so she couldn't be there. She kind of could have, but she decided not to go. She has a quote where she said, "I won't win. I never do. I just get nominated." Which, I mean, that's kind of like what Paul Newman said, too, after he lost for The Verdict and he didn't show up for The Color of Money. And then there you go.
There it is.
She also had a quote where she said, "There are so few decent roles for women these days. If you work, you get nominated."
Wow.
Which feels slightly disparaging and maybe not what she intended, but yeah.
I saw
I sort
that
of see what she
Oscar.
means, even if, no. Well, anyway, I think it's time to move on to some Twitter questions. We got so many for this particular year. Let's go with Matt Stillman, who said, "Was the momentum from The Exorcist what pushed Burstyn past the field?" So I kind of touched on that. I think it definitely helped to prove that she was here to stay. So yeah, it didn't hurt.
I think so too. And the others had other things working against them that I think kind of helped Burstyn go over the edge.
Fritz said, "What would have happened if Alice had come out in 73 and The Exorcist in 74?
This one I thought was really hard because I am inclined to think that Glenda still wins her Oscar.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking, 73. I was like thinking of the years. Yeah. Glenda, I don't know. The Academy was so high on her. They loved her.
Oh, yeah.
And I am sort of inclined to think that she would still win, even if Burstyn got in for a more palatable role, like Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, instead of The Exorcist. If The Exorcist comes out in 74... I actually think that our runner-up wins. I don't think Ellen wins either.
Wow. Okay. And then she would have had her own overdue narrative eventually.
Yeah. Maybe she would have won for Pieces of a Woman or something decades later.
Goodness.
Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah. Well, there was no beating Julia. Let's be real.
Oh, yeah. No.
But,
please.
But yeah, I think people would be even more upset if Ellen had lost in 2000 for that. Anyway, yes. I sort of think Ellen could have won in 73 for Alice. I think the issue with 73 is that I don't think there was a super clear alternative there, which we talked about on that episode. So she always tends to prevail when the race is in chaos.
It's true.
So yeah, I think maybe if there was that same kind of like movement and a narrative behind Ellen, that maybe she could have taken it in 73 and then lost in 74 for The Exorcist. But Andrew Carden said, "Rank the Best Actress nominees who portrayed an Alice." Alice Adams for Katharine Hepburn, Alice in A Place in the Sun for Shelley Winters, Simone Signoret in Room at the Top, Ellen Burstyn here, and then Julianne Moore in Still Alice.
Oh, I think they're all great, actually. I really do love all of these performances. Yeah. I think I would actually put Shelley Winters at the top. I love her in A Place in the Sun. She would either be number 1 or number 2. Then I think I would do Simone Signoret, then Julianne Moore. I think she's great in that, and it's kind of underrated now because people just knew she was going to win. Then I would say Hepburn and then Burstyn, but again, they're all really good.
Wow. I feel like we have the complete opposite ranking somehow. Yeah. I have Burstyn at number 1. Yeah. She just feels so fully formed.
Yeah.
Julianne Moore I would have at number 2. I also defend that performance, and I feel like people disparage that as a legacy win when I think she earns it, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I would put Simone Signoret at number 3. Really, really like that performance. Katharine Hepburn at number 4 and Shelley Winters at number 5. Even though, again, they're all great. I love them all.
Something about that plate of melted ice cream that Shelley Winters has that just sends me to space.
That's fair. Yeah. All right. Well, another one from Fritz. Cast Ellen with one of her co-nominees in a 70s Thelma and Louise.
I loved this, and I went with Diahann Carroll.
Yeah. I went with Valerie Perrine.
Nice.
Yeah, I think they would play off each other well, especially if Ellen Burstyn was like the Susan Sarandon character and Valerie Perrine was like Gina Davis.
I can see that.
But I like the Diahann Carroll version too. I think that would be an interesting dynamic.
I feel like she would be really fun in either part. I could see her in either one.
Casey Chapman said, Ellen Burstyn is such a fulfilling winner. I happen to believe she should have 4 Oscar wins. Could you rank her 6 nominations and provide 3 other films you would have nominated her for? Well, I'll just say up front, I'm going to reserve my ranking until I get to Requiem for a Dream, obviously. Did you have a preferred performance or a ranking even?
Yeah, I can do a ranking. So I have Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore at number 1. Then I'm going to go with The Exorcist. I'm sorry to your listeners. I hate Requiem for a Dream. Like, Darren Aronofsky is not for me. I just really struggle with him. And she gives a great, fully committed performance. I just do not like the movie. But I have a third. Then I'll do Same Time, then Resurrection, then Last Picture Show.
I will just say that I would have a similar ranking.
Okay.
And leave it at that.
Okay.
Yes.
Different than our Alice rankings.
Yes. I don't know if there's other performances that she wasn't nominated for, but I feel like a lot of her great work she was nominated for. Yeah. So maybe Pieces of a Woman. I don't know if you liked that performance, but
I did like that performance. I do think that's just so Vanessa Kirby's movie. But I would have been fine with her having a nomination that year for sure. But I do think the 6 nominations that she has are phenomenal. And I would have given her 2 wins personally.
Yeah. Ryan McQuaid, who clearly had foresight that you were the guest on this episode.
Who is Ryan? I don't know him.
Whomst?
Who?
Yes. Chris Christopherson, Smash or Pass? So this is a segment that you do on your show.
Yes. The fact that I didn't even let you say that fully and I was just ready to say smash is sad.
Yeah, you were ready.
I was ready, but
you were ready to smash.
Absolutely a smash for sure. I kept thinking, like, if this were made today, I could just see A Star is Born parallel, and Bradley Cooper, Jackson Maine Bradley Cooper, could totally do this part. Also a smash, obviously.
Well, yes, that's implied. Yeah, in this movie in particular, also a smash. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the sexual dynamic going on between the two of them.
Yeah.
Sammy Flowers said, why do people just seem to forget Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, as well as Ellen Burstyn's Oscar-winning performance when they criticize Scorsese for a lack of caring with his female characters? This is also a good question for you as well, because speaking of Ryan McQuaid, you did your own Scorsese miniseries on In Session Film, and you watched most, if not all, of his films, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure you have a perspective on this.
Definitely. So yeah, I watched all of Scorsese's films for that series. We didn't cover all of them. We covered a good number of them. You know, it's interesting because I do think that people who criticize Scorsese for this simply haven't seen enough of his movies.
Yeah.
Or they're viewing them through a lens that just feels kind of performative to me, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of Scorsese's movies that are really well known are his very hyper-masculine mob movies. So I think that can sometimes inform people's perspectives when they think that he doesn't know how to write female characters or direct women, anything like that. But I think it couldn't be further from the truth. I think that with Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, it just feels so outside of Scorsese's filmography that I think people forget it. It also is so early in his filmography. It was before he had really, I think, fully found his voice as a director. And because it feels like an outlier, I think it is forgotten, but it certainly shouldn't be. I think it's one of his best films, and he has a lot of great female performances and characters in his filmography. For anyone looking for a recommendation, I would share Casino. I'm obsessed with Sharon Stone in Casino. It's one of my favorite performances in all of his filmography. And of course, The Age of Innocence, the chemistry between Michelle Pfeiffer and Daniel Day-Lewis. I'm so sorry that's the third time I brought him up today. It's very on brand, though. I know.
I get it.
And Winona Ryder, like, they were both wonderful in it. So those are two that I would recommend to anyone concerned about the women in his films.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
A good question, obviously. I do think all of the gangster films and the DiCaprio and the De Niro of it all is a huge part of his legacy. I just think because on a surface level, it's so different from most of his other films that maybe people straight up don't even know that he directed this or that this even exists. Miles McHale said, Diahann Carroll was the first Black woman to win the Best Actress Musical Tony. Should she have been the first to win the Oscar?
I don't want to step on my answer for later for this particular Oscar, but I will say she definitely deserved more leading roles that could have given her extra nominations and a win. I think there's plenty of time for her, and she clearly showed she was an incredible actress who audiences and voters liked well enough to get her this nomination. So yeah, I think she definitely deserved better, and I could certainly see a case where she should have been the first Black woman to win.
Yeah, that's very well said. I will just say I personally would not give her the win for this necessarily, but I do agree that honestly she feels like the kind of actress, and sort of Cicely Tyson too, who we talked about a few weeks ago, where they deserved better roles in film in lead and could have been the first to do it with the right opportunities that were ultimately denied of them. Faye Dunaway's Salad Boy, our friend.
Amazing.
Should Faye have won an honorary Oscar for throwing a cup of her piss at Polanski this year for Chinatown? An incredible question. And yes.
One of the best questions I think that at least I've had when I've been on your show before.
Yes.
Yes, she should have. But I also have to say that she denies that this happened and gets very defensive. So be careful, Salad Boy. She may be listening.
Yeah. Hopefully she's not eating a salad while
I hope not.
Hearing that. Yeah. Okay. Fritz said, should Faye have gotten her second nomination earlier? This is another one that I think is very fitting that you're here because you have recently watched quite a few Fays.
Yeah. So breaking the fourth wall a little here. Fritz, the way that you feel about Louise Reiner is how I feel about Faye Dunaway. Just a little for context. So I would give her the win in 1970 for Puzzle of a Downfall Child. I think she's fabulous in that movie. That movie doesn't always work. It's very experimental, but she is unbelievable and deserving of a win, especially in that year.
Yeah, that's still a blind spot for me.
Oh, you will like it, I think.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I would, but I mean, she deserves plenty more than 3 nominations, I will say.
Yeah.
I think she's worthy of 6. Like Ellen Burstyn, I think she's in that discussion.
Oh my God. We don't want to go down the list for me. Yeah, Mommy Dearest.
Yes.
Oh my God. Of course.
Yeah. James R. Byrne said, what the hello dolly happened to Miss Dunaway? Would you not argue she was a brilliant actress and the type of old-fashioned star who lit up the screen? I could see her in Fatal Attraction, 6 Degrees of Separation, The Mom in Titanic, Devil Wears Prada, etc. What happened?
Whoa. Oh my God. I love this question. You've come to the right place. I am the right person to help. Yeah, what happened to Faye? I mean, it's crazy. I think that she really is one of the best actresses ever. She's personally my favorite actress. I love her so much. I think that she's brilliant. She's just a perfectionist, and all of her drama, I think, from crew members, from directors, really, really affected her reputation. And unfortunately, starring in Mommy Dearest after only a few years after winning an Oscar, really, it had the promise, I think, to be on paper a successful move for her. And I stand by the performance. I think she's leaning into the schlocky quality of the memoir, and she understands that character on a deeper level. I think she transforms into Joan, but audiences just did not see it at the time, and she got a Razzie, which I hate the Razzies. We don't like bringing them up, but I think it really did ruin her career. And then she leaned into campier roles, and now she's doing some faith-based films. She's in a really, really weird spot, and I think a lot of that is because of her reputation, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think her reputation just got the better of her. It's unfortunate because, as we know, some male actors have had horrible reputations and are still working.
Yep.
Jamie said, for the ladies who had previous nominations, where do you rank these performances against those that got Oscars attention before? Okay. So I assume that's just Ellen and Faye. Yeah, for Ellen, I would say Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, then The Exorcist, then The Last Picture Show. And for Faye, it's so difficult because I love Chinatown, but Bonnie and Clyde, she's incredible in Bonnie and Clyde, and that is such a Star is Born moment for her, and where I really fell in love with her. So I would say Bonnie and Clyde first, and then Chinatown. Yes, we're in agreement at this one as well. Both the ranking for that and preferring Bonnie and Clyde. So there you go. Cool. Miles McHale said, could Perrine have triumphed in supporting? This one's really difficult too. I think there's a world where she definitely could have, because of the attention that she got, you know, winning Best Actress at Cannes and, you know, getting these I forgot to mention that notices, like big notices for her performance, being in a movie I think that the Academy liked well enough. I think she could have, but that category was really weird at the Oscars this year. One of my least favorite wins really ever, which like pains me to say because I love Ingrid Bergman, but my God. But I think a lot of the buzz that year was around Valentina Cortese for Day for Night. So I don't know if Valerie triumphs here, but I think it's possible. Certainly. She definitely would have gotten a nomination. She would have been closer to a win, for sure, so. In supporting. Yeah, and it would have been between her and Valentina. Bobby Doyle said, Lenny is one of the only films of the decade shot in black and white. Does this affect Perrine's performance at all? Would any of these other films benefit from being shot this way? Ooh, I don't think it affects like her performance, but I do love the cinematography. Yeah. I love the look of it, and it really enhances that documentary like feel and quality. For other films that I think would have been good in black and white, I don't know. I think I like that they're all in color. The other one, like it works for them. Women Under the Influence. That's the only one I could have maybe said would work, especially because Cassavetes has played in black and white before. Right. So I could see that one, but that would be the only one I would say could really work. I agree. Greg Adams said, would Rowlands steamroll through today's award season with a performance like that, or would it be too weird or niche and fail to register at all? I really liked this question. I actually do think that if this movie came out today and we had the Rowlands performance, that she would win, 48 regional critics prizes, but would not win the Oscar. That sounds very accurate, honestly. Unfortunately. I think it would have a strong campaign. I do almost wonder if it could be like a To Leslie situation, honestly. The way I keep thinking about that movie when you bring up like resources and small campaigns. I just haven't said it. I think that could happen where I could imagine a large group of actors posting online about like, you have to see A Woman Under the Influence. What Gena Rowlands does is one of the best things I've ever seen. Kate Winslet is just like raving it to the high heavens. A small movie with a giant heart. Yeah, a giant something. Yeah. Yes. All right. Well, ZZ75 said, is Gena the greatest actress to never win an Oscar? This one was hard too. There's so many incredible actresses who've never won an Oscar. My gut instinct was to go with Barbara Stanwyck, actually. So even with the performance, I still went back to Barbara Stanwyck, who I would have given 3 Oscars. Stella Dallas, Ball of Fire, and Double Indemnity. So it's really criminal that she never won. And then Judy Garland was my other pick. It just feels weird that she doesn't have one. Yeah, those are some of my top 5 ever. And in terms of living, Liv Ullmann, I think, is a good example of it. I obviously have Glenn as my favorite. I don't know if she's the absolute best ever, but yeah, certainly up there. Lila said, considering how iconic and how fondly remembered Gena Rowlands' performance is, which actress from today do you think would be able to do a decent job in the same role? And if so, would she have a chance to get nominated and maybe even win the Oscar? I do have a very good one for this, but I don't know if you have one too.
I have a couple. So I couldn't get the idea of a Viola Davis version of this out of my head. Like, if she's a little bit younger, God. I feel like she would destroy it. But my pick is actually Virginia Fira, who played Benedetta.
Wow.
I
did not see that coming.
Oh my God. So she's in this movie, Other People's Children, that's come out limited this year. It premiered at Venice last year. And I would love to see her unravel, because between those two movies, you can really see her emotional range as an actress. And I think she would kill it.
Wow. I love that. I did really love Benedetta, so I haven't seen Other People's Children yet, but I'll take your word for it. My choice is Carrie Coon.
Oh my God. Yes. She needs a role like this too. She would be so incredible, and we need to get her an Oscar nomination.
Every time I see Carrie Coon in anything, I just think of how great she would have been in a Cassavetes film.
Yeah.
You know? I feel like she's just born into the wrong era, unfortunately. Ryan McQuaid and Dark Shaka both want to know if this is one of the strongest lineups that I've covered so far, or of Oscar history at all. And I think we could both agree that yes.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I think this is the strongest one. There are definitely other contenders for me that come close. Absolutely. I love 1937, the previous year I was on for, even though we don't like the winner. But there's definitely some other good ones, but this is top tier for me.
Totally. Yeah. And Dark Shaka's other question is, which nominated actress gave the best reaction to the announcement of Burstyn's win?
Well, you know what I have to say here. My queen, Faye Dunaway, saying "knew it" is iconic.
Yes, and just like that forced smile.
Yeah,
very
like that look.
Good stuff.
It's so good.
Just like that, bemused. Yeah.
She looks miserable when they announce too. She just like looks like she doesn't want to be there, and then that smile.
I mean, that's that's all actresses in the 70s have that kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Of just like very serious. Nobody's clapping. It's just like so solemn.
Yeah.
But I do love Valerie Perrine, just like open mouth, like, whoa, is just like full shock. It's great. And Diahann Carroll is just like very surprised too.
Yeah.
I encourage people to look that up.
It's very good.
Good stuff. Yeah. Christoph and Ayrton O'Brien want us to talk about Liv Ullmann and who we think she would replace if she was allowed to compete for Scenes from a Marriage.
Yeah, it's tricky, and I think part of it, like, I really have to put myself back in the 70s, because if I think about it today, it's like I can only see Liv or Jenna getting in, not both. Like, these sorts of performances just feel so... I mean, I love them both. I love Liv Ullmann. And Scenes from a Marriage, she absolutely deserved a nomination, I think. I don't know about a chance to win. It's always a bit trickier there, because I do think it doesn't feel like she could necessarily win for that, unfortunately. But I think she would kick out Diahann Carroll, unfortunately.
I agree. I think she does. Yep, replace Diahann Carroll. I do think Ellen still wins, though, to be clear. But if Liv Ullmann was here, I mean, we would have had another fascinating one to break down here.
Yeah.
My goodness. Juan Carlos Ojano said, recast the nominated roles with actresses working today.
This was hard.
Do you have,
I have some.
Your list?
I have some,
okay.
Yeah. So I shared my answer for A Woman Under the Influence, Virginia Fira.
Yes, did I. Carrie Coon.
Yes.
Yep.
So for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, I have two for this. I think Rachel McAdams would be great. I recently saw her in Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, and I'm just so happy she's back. She was just extraordinary in that movie. I also think Hong Chow could do it, directed by Kelly Reichardt.
Ooh. I love that.
I love like the road movie quality. I feel like Kelly and Hong Chow could really, really nail that. For Claudine, I have Danielle Deadwyler. I think, she coming off of last year, I think she would be great here. For Lenny, I have Sydney Sweeney. I feel like
I thought of her too.
Really, she's just ready for that type of role. And I think she also kind of nails that vulnerability that the actress needs to have and the openness. So I feel like she would be good. And then for Chinatown, this was the one I really, really struggled with. Like, it's just so hard to think of a replacement for Faye. But I tried to go a little young on this one and think of like who's someone who hasn't had like a big role like this who I think could really nail it. So I actually went with Margaret Qualley. I feel like she's very promising and could do it. Could do the mystery. Yeah.
Well, for mine, for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, this is slightly off the beaten path, but I went with Tatiana Maslany.
Nice. I like that.
I think she has a everyday kind of quality that she could play the humor and the working class stuff pretty well. Mm-hmm. For Claudine, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, actually. Nicole Bahari, I think, would be really good in that role. For Lenny, I did think of Sydney Sweeney, but I also, as an alternative, I could see like a Lily James maybe doing something like that.
Yeah.
Possibly.
I could see that.
And then for Chinatown, I have Rosamund Pike.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I like that. Mm-hmm. Well, I love Gone Girl, obviously. So she has that
the darkness, the mystery. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The unknowable accent work. It's just
I would love to hear the accent. I'm very curious actually what that would sound like. I love that. She can also do period films. Mm-hmm. You have to have someone I think who can nail that. Yeah.
Cinema Sex Kitten says, rank these roles by how well they would be suited for a CBS sitcom that runs from 1976 to 1985.
I love this question. My answer I feel like is a little obvious. So I did Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore first. Just felt easy. Then I went with Claudine. Then Lenny. Then, the last two, it's pretty brutal. I think you can... I think A Woman Under the Influence I put next because I think you could spin that. It would be dangerous. You need the right person to do it. But it feels more like it could be a sitcom than Chinatown, which I have absolutely no idea how anyone would turn that into a sitcom. So I put that last.
I have the exact same ranking.
Great.
For pretty much the same reasons. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. For A Woman Under the Influence, I could see trying to do a United States of Terror kind of thing with it. Gordon at Mark Wahlberg said, which other Best Actress winning movies would you like to have seen spun off into a sitcom? And as a follow-up, what other Scorsese movie would you most like to have seen spun off into a sitcom?
This is another fun question. I love these sitcom questions. It's hard to find best actors winning performances that are light enough to become sitcoms. But I could definitely see a sitcom for the Wong family and for Michelle Yeoh. Oh. So I went very recent here. I feel like that could work as a sitcom.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I want to take that answer.
And then for the Scorsese movie, this was really difficult, but I actually went with Bringing Out the Dead. Have you seen that?
No, that's one of the few that I have not seen, unfortunately.
So Nicolas Cage is a paramedic who just drives around at night trying to save people. He hallucinates, and I just sort of got this image of one of those strange medical sitcoms or procedurals. It just feels like it could maybe work. That was hard too, but yeah, I went with that one.
I for the Scorsese one, actually, I thought of Casino for some reason. Just because, I don't know, it's one of those things where it's a workplace kind of environment that you could see a lot of potential storylines coming from that. I don't know.
I think so. I think that's right.
Admittedly, I struggled with finding a sitcom that could work from a Scorsese film, quite honestly. But yeah, for other Best Actress winning movies, also kind of tough because it's a category that doesn't have a lot of comedic wins.
Yeah.
In particular. I kind of want to see Mildred Pierce, but not focus on her child. Just do her becoming a single working mom kind of thing.
I think that works too. Yeah.
Okay.
It's tricky. So many dramas.
I know. Sue Ellen Rossi said, we know Linda Lavin took on the role of Alice on TV. Who would play in TV shows of the other nominated films? 70s TV actresses only.
The fact that I called my dad for help on this question as a phone a friend.
I love it.
So you'll love this, I think. Even though it would take away, I think, maybe a little bit of her thunder from Ordinary People, I went with Mary Tyler Moore for A Woman Under the Influence. She could nail it, I think. It would be big.
Oof. Wow.
I think she could do it. I went with Farrah Fawcett for Lenny.
I have the exact same one. Yep.
Amazing. Then I went with Janae Dubois for Claudine. And for Chinatown, Dead End. We both were really trying. We were like, Faye is just so perfect. Like, she has this quality that we couldn't think of for anyone else. So I am curious to hear your answer because I didn't have anyone for that one.
Well, this might be a little bit of a cop-out also, but I don't see any reason not having Diahann Carroll just reprise her role.
Yeah.
Given all her work on TV.
I think that makes sense.
She could easily just do it again. And then I actually did have Mary Tyler Moore, but in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see it.
I could too.
And then, Farrah Fawcett and Lenny. For A Woman Under the Influence, I have Jean Stapleton.
Oh, I like that. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be very intense, but I could see it.
Yeah.
And for Chinatown, I also struggled the most with this one. I landed on Peggy Lipton.
Okay. I think that's close. I think that makes sense. I didn't think of her, but I like that.
Christopher Perkins said, 1974 saw the release of a John Waters classic, Female Trouble. Which of these 5 nominees would you replace with Divine in their respective role?
Oh my God, this was great too. I just could not get over imagining Divine in Chinatown. It was just great.
Yes.
I need that John Waters version of the movie. Perhaps that could have been the sequel.
I like it.
Yeah.
Well, I will say the opening of Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore has the sort of kitschy vibe of a John Waters film, so I would love to have seen Divine as Alice.
I think that's great too. I could totally see that.
Very like Americana, you know?
Yeah.
Joey Gentili said, recast these 70s Oscar talents in the roles above. Meryl Streep, Quinn Cummings, Diana Ross, Karen Black, Jill Clayburgh.
This was also challenging. First, I'll say I love Karen Black, and I wish she had more nominations. I would go Diana Ross for Claudine. I would so if we age up Quinn Cummings a little bit for the time, I would put her in.
You have to for any of them.
Yeah, I would put her in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. I would put Karen Black in Lenny. I would put Meryl in Chinatown. I think she has that kind of unknowable quality. And I would give Jill Clayburgh A Woman Under the Influence. I think she could also really nail that.
We are 5 for 5 yet again.
Oh, wow.
That is the exact combination that I came up with. Yeah. And the one I would most want to see is Jill Clayburgh.
Yeah.
Just to see what she could do with that.
I think she really could do it. I love her. I love her in An Unmarried Woman.
Coming soon.
Yeah.
Our final question is for Cinema Sex Kitten, who said, Honey Bruce was still alive and only around 48 when this film was released. Which 48-ish star in 2023 do you think would be a great subject for a biopic? Drew Barrymore, Angelina Jolie, roughly all of the Spice Girls, Lauryn Hill.
Such a great question. I'm surprised we haven't had more on the Spice Girls. Like, that just feels like something we could have. But I went with Angelina Jolie. What a life. Like, there's a lot packed in there. Everything with Brangelina to, like, just her career, I think, has been really interesting. Like, her work, also, like, her philanthropy work, everything like that. I feel like she has a lot that we could learn about. And I think she would also pick the right director. I feel like she's really smart and very savvy, and I feel like she wouldn't let it be a standard biopic.
I like that. Yeah. I think, again, all would be great. I do think also the way that Drew Barrymore has kind of reinvented herself.
Yeah.
And had such a roller coaster, including child stardom and everything. I think, yeah, she would be good for that. We can call it Wildflower, and just there you go.
I love that. I think that's a good choice too.
Okay. Great questions once again. Thank you, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to get to our final segment where we will reveal our runner-up, who we think was the runner-up. Sophia, who was the runner-up to Ellen Burstyn?
I think Gena Rowlands was the runner-up to Ellen Burstyn. And it's funny because in the past when I've looked at this year, I've always thought, could Faye Dunaway have won this for Chinatown? I think looking at it through today's lens, Best Picture nominee, had a lot of nominations, but this, I really think like Gena Rowlands was close. I think that the performance that she gave, of course, is incredibly strong, but she hit some of the precursors. The fact that they even got this movie out in front of people to vote for it, like that was a huge hurdle too. But yeah, I think she was close, and I think she was the runner-up.
I cannot argue with that. Yeah, I do think Faye Dunaway was the only other alternative there, but that Gena Rowlands is just so undeniable, ultimately. Obviously not as undeniable as to win, but in the sense that I think she could get a lot of people behind her compared to the others.
Mm-hmm.
I almost relate it to, like, not to make it like a coastal thing, but I feel like there's a lot of like LA people who would like Ellen Burstyn and New York people who would like Gena Rowlands.
Yes, that's
and
right.
There's just like more LA people in the Academy, ultimately. But final question, who would be your winner? Who would you vote for?
So, despite genuinely loving all of these performances and nominees, I have to go with Gena Rowlands for her work in A Woman Under the Influence. I think it is the best performance that never won an Oscar. So, in a great year, too, like she really is my choice. I think everything that we mentioned in our pretty lengthy discussion about the movie really sums up why I would vote for her. But I think it's singular work. It's something that it doesn't feel like acting to me. It feels like living. And you hope for that when you watch movies, and I don't think many actors have come close to touching a performance of this caliber. It's extraordinary, wonderful, all of the adjectives.
Yes, transcendent even.
Yes.
Yeah, I would also vote for Gena Rowlands. I would be part of that hypothetical New York crowd voting for Gena Rowlands.
Welcome.
Yes, I'm spiritually New York. Yeah, I just find that performance completely transcends pretty much any other performance that I have ever seen. For as hyperbolic as that sounds, it really is the case here, where it's just she tapped into something very primal and raw and uncomfortable, but is riveting nonetheless. And personally, even in this incredible lineup, no one comes close to touching what she did in A Woman Under the Influence.
I concur.
Sophia, thank you so much again for another marathon episode where we really broke down so much fascinating stuff and really got a nice snapshot of the 70s, which is one of my favorite eras, one of your favorite eras. So thank you so much for joining me for this.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. It really was, an honor to come on for this year. It's such a big year, and I really do think we covered all that we could with these fantastic nominees. There's so much more out there. So for all your listeners, go watch these movies, go read about these women. It's really an incredible year. And again, thank you so much for having me. I love coming on this show, and especially for years like this, you always give me fun years. So I am grateful for that too.
Yes, it was truly a blast. It went by very fast.
It did.
So where can people find more of you on the internet?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Sophia_Sim, C-I-M. I tweet a lot about actresses and the Oscars and upcoming movies. I also have a podcast called Oscar Wild that I host with my dear friend Nick, where we cover the current award season, but also do a lot of fun retrospectives. So for the entire month of May, we talked about a number of Faye Dunaway movies as part of our May Dunaway series, which was very fun. I'm glad he humored me with that. But now, when this episode airs, we will have, you get a little first sneak preview. We have Jane June, where we'll be talking about Jane Fonda. So we'll be doing her films too a little bit. So that'll be a lot of fun. Not to the same extent that we're talking about Faye. And you can find that on Twitter and Instagram at OscarWildPod, wherever you find your podcasts. And then I also have reviews on awardswatch.com. Yeah, that's where you can find me.
Highly recommend following Sophia if you haven't already.
Thanks.
I assume that you have if you're listening. All right. Yes. Thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson and Oscar Runner-Up. Instagram at And the Runner-Up is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup is. Next week, we'll be covering the 1975 Best Actress lineup, where the nominees were Isabella Gianni in The Story of Adele H., Anne Margaret in Tommy, Louise Fletcher in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Glenda Jackson in Hedda, and Carol Kane in Hester Street, with the winner being Louise Fletcher. So with that, thanks again, Sophia.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
And I will bid you all adieu.